Good morning. Well, Chair Shelley Bailey, call the Oregon Prescription Drug Affordability Board meeting of June 17, 2026 to order. Melissa, if you could please call roll.
Chair Shelley Bailey.
Present.
Vice Chair Dan Hartung.
Present.
Lori Hoagland.
Present.
Dan Kennedy.
Present.
Michelle Coder. Michelle Coder is here. So I'll check her mic. Chris Lehman.
Here.
John Murray.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Perfect. Thank you, Melissa. We do want to welcome everyone to today's meeting. We have an American Sign Language interpreter with us today. Please use the Zoom controls to access the interpretation channel, and that information is presented on the screen now. I would like to reference that our agenda now begins with a conflict of interest declaration, which are stated each month according to board policies. Do any board members have any declarations of potential or actual conflict of interest that they would like to mention here today? Do board members, have they met with entities or individuals related to board activities? And have board members provided testimony to the Oregon legislature about prescription drugs? Mr. Murray, I see your hand is raised, so you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Bailey. Under advisement of the Oregon Ethics Commission, I declare a potential conflict of interest due to my ownership of Murray Drugs, comprised of 3 independent pharmacies in Eastern Oregon that have pharmacy services contracts with PBMs, insurance companies in the state of Oregon. Also, on June 6th, I attended the Oregon Independent Pharmacy Summit in Corvallis at Oregon State Pharmacy School, and Representative Rob Nose was there and was the speaker. And I conversed with him, although it was in an auditorium with 100 other people. We talked about PDAB activities, House Bill 3212, and his perspective on pharmacy legislation. I did ask for if he would be welcome, or he would be open to the idea of PDAB recommended policies. And I mentioned in particular getting confidential access to manufacturer information, and I touted transparency. So there was a number of things on our agenda that we talked about in front of 100 people, but it was a very good conversation. So I just wanted to declare that, please.
Thank you for sharing that, Mr. Murray. Mr. Lehman, your hand is raised and you have the floor.
Thanks, Chair Bailey. I would like to disclose a potential conflict of interest. In my role with Columbia Memorial Hospital, I have leadership responsibilities related to the hospital's infusion operations. Because the infusion center administers infusion medications that will be reviewed by the board as part of our 2026 drug reviews, there could be a potential financial impact on my employer. Because none of the board's actions are certain to have financial implications, I believe this represents only a potential conflict of interest. And based on guidance from the Oregon Ethics Commission, I will continue to participate in the discussion and voting on these matters. Thank you, Chair Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Lehman. I would personally like to disclose that I participated in the Transparency RX Summit last month. I did not participate related to Oregon PDAB, but just thought I would raise awareness related to that fact. But again, it had no link to Oregon PDAB. I would like to now move forward related to the correction of the draft minutes from the May 20th, 2026 meeting. Does anyone here have any suggested edits to the May minutes? Okay, well, if there are no corrections to the minutes, then we will go ahead and approve the minutes as presented to the board. So I would now like to call on Executive Director Sarah Young to provide a program update. Sarah, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Bailey, and good morning, members of the board. First thing I wanted to share a board process update. As many of you are aware, the governor nominated Noel Redmond of Lake Oswego to the vacant position on the PDAB. The Senate Rules Committee reviewed the recent board and commission nominations on Monday, and I believe the Senate will likely vote today on those nominations. So I will keep board members informed when we have an official update about our vacant position, and hopefully we will be able to welcome a new board member at our next meeting in July. So that is great to see progress on filling that vacancy. In the last couple of months, the PDAB team has really been focusing on analyzing data and preparing the first group of drug review packets that the board will be discussing today. The team also has been completing the work on the consumer outreach project and completing that report on those sessions that we held in April and May. The report is included in today's board packet and also posted to the drug review webpage on the PDAB website. So I encourage stakeholders to take a look at that information. The team has also worked on developing a discussion framework to help the board identify policy concepts that you wish to research and consider for this year's annual report to the legislature, and we will talk more about that later in today's meeting. Of course, we continue to welcome input about all of the drugs under review from interested parties, including patients, people with medical training, safety net clinics, manufacturers, PBMs, and insurers. And people can share written feedback through the feedback forms on the PDAB website and also through comment letters. As folks know, we will continue to update the drug review packets over the next 2 months to incorporate additional public comment as it comes in and to correct any errors we identify. This includes the packets both for the drugs that we are discussing today and for the drugs scheduled for future meetings. So I just want to remind everyone to please check the version history on page 3 of each posted drug review packet for the latest updates and any changes we've made to these rolling documents. I also want to just remind stakeholders about our PDAB processes, as today's meeting is the start of this year's deep dive into the individual drug reviews. It's important to keep in mind that the board has made this review process an iterative process to enable and encourage public comment, again, on all of the drugs. As you know, we released version 1 of the drug review packets for the insulins and anti-diabetic drugs a week ago, but these are not the final versions. And those public feedback forms that I mentioned will remain open for the next 2 months to collect additional input on both future drugs and these products. That will help the board get as much information as possible for the September and October meetings, where the board will be discussing and voting on the final packets, including the additional feedback we receive over the next couple of months. So I want to make sure that stakeholders know that the week since we first posted the packets for today's discussion is not your only opportunity for feedback. This iterative process provides multiple weeks for stakeholders to review those packets and provide additional feedback. In other rulemaking news related to the PDAB work, the DCBS Division of Financial Regulation held a rulemaking advisory committee meeting June 2nd about developing the permanent rules for the reinstated requirement that pharmaceutical manufacturers complete an annual price increase report for drugs that cost $100 or more per month and had a price increase of 10% or more. Again, that's a report to the Drug Price Transparency Program. We want to make sure folks know about that rulemaking that is underway. And with that, any questions from the board about our current work or our program updates? Hearing none, with that, I will turn it back to you, Chair Bailey. Thank you.
All right, audio is off. Thank you very much, Sarah, for the update, and leaning into your update kind of related to RAC and related to Member Murray's comment about his discussion with Rob Nose. I did want to state for the record for my colleagues here today that Vice Chair Dr. Hartung and myself met with Senator Patterson, also with Sarah last month or early this month. And I did want to let my colleagues here know today that Senator Patterson did say that she would add room in her kind of placeholder bills for the two policy recommendations that came out of the 2025 board packet. So those two recommendations were patient out-of-pocket cost caps for the drugs that we had identified in our packet last year, as well as point of sale rebate pass-through. So I just want to reinforce that legislators are listening and interested in the work of the Oregon PDAB. So as we move into the policy side of our discussion, I just wanted to update my peers that that is a discussion that we had, and those were we're grateful for Senator Patterson for meeting with us and hearing those recommendations that we made as a board together last year. We also, Vice Chair Dr. Hartog and myself will also meet with Representative Nose and kind of have a similar discussion. So just wanted to make sure to provide that update to my peers today. I did, though, we are moving to the general public comment letter period of our board meeting. So today the board will have two public comment periods. The first topic is for public comments about general topics. So the second period is for comments about prescription drugs specifically under board review today. So I would like to share that we did receive 4 letters about general topics. So I will go ahead and read the list. And I did want to highlight before I read the list that we did not have any requests to speak related to general topics and provide oral testimony today. So the letters that we received were from Tiffany Westrick Roberson from the Each Pick Coalition, from Aaron Daughtry from Elevate Rare, from Maya Igrashi from Portland, and from Tiffany Westrick Robertson from Each Pick Coalition. So those were the written general comments that we received. We now will move into the second public comment portion of our agenda, which is for comments about Group 1 presentations related to the drugs under review. So as a reminder, those drugs under review today are Jardiance, Mounjaro, Ozempic, and Humulin R U-500. The board received 3 letters specific to the drugs under review in Group 1. And we also did not receive any requests to speak and provide oral testimony related to those drugs. I would like to remind people some of these drugs under review, we did receive testimony last year when we did review. So I would encourage my colleagues to obviously go back and listen to those testimonies provided last year. But for the written comments we received, the letters we received were from Rachel Dolan from Eli Lilly and Company related to Mounjaro and Humulin, from Michael Valenta and Lisa Pulver from Johnson & Johnson, from Robert Nolan from the Arthritis Foundation related to Skyrizi and Xeljanz. So we are now moving to the first drug review portion of our agenda related to Jardiance, Mounjaro, Ozempic, Humulin R U-500, concentrated, and KwikPen. So the board will now begin its drug review process. The drugs under review I just referenced, and we have already provided an opportunity for public comment about the drugs under review. However, if we missed calling on someone, which I do not believe I did, but if I did miss someone, you can raise your hand or please let Melissa know. So PDAB staff, I think that Courtney may be helping facilitate this initial part of the discussion. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Bailey, and good morning, board. As normal, I'm going to share my screen, and we're actually going to first start off by just level setting kind of the work that we've been doing where we're at. Hopefully everybody is familiar with the roadmap and setting up these reviews. So we've got through the big bulk of the data call and APAC analysis, and all that information is presented in the material packets. So starting today is our Group 1, which again includes those anti-diabetics, Jardiance, Mounjaro, and Ozempic, and then Humulin R U-500. That includes the concentrated vial and the KwikPen. Today is associated with a discussion about the information inside the material packet. It is not intended to vote or make any specific decisions. As Sarah said, we will follow up again in September and October with more thorough discussions. This is just a an introduction to the material, also understanding that these are rolling packets, and so some of the information will change. So with that, yesterday you should have received an update on the material packets. The health equity information was not as accurate as we wanted it to be. So when it was originally published, we had to go back and update the health equity information. So as of now, the group 1 package should be up to date and ready for a review and conversation for today. Including later this afternoon or later in the conversation today, we will be discussing policy recommendations. I'll explain more in detail about that conversation, but just that conversation does start today. We will be presenting the information about the public outreach, and again, the feedback forms that are online are still open. We did get some public comments from manufacturers from the Humulin R U-500 group and from Mounjaro. So the material packets are also updated with feedback information under the stakeholder sections of those 2 packets. So before I dive into the rest of the review, any other questions about the roadmap and where we're going? Nope. All right, so let me stop sharing my screen. And so this is kind of the part of the conversation where I can pull the drugs up and we can start reviewing them. Is there any drug that the board would like to start off with to start the conversation? All right, hearing none, I'm just going to go at the top of my list, which is Jardiance. So let me again share my screen. All right, again, version 2, just because it was updated with additional material packets. So every time additional information is set up, you'll see a version and then maybe a subversion. Subversions usually include like if there is stakeholder feedback, no significant changes, just additional like updates to the material packet. So that's kind of where the version controls come in. All that will always be found here under document version history. So as similar to the last review structure, we have this kind of summary page identifying the therapeutic alternatives, kind of the information about each of those drugs, high level information about the price history. So for Jardiance, it rose an average annual 3.6% between 2019 to 2025. And then each of the therapeutic alternatives also received a % increase. Brenzivia does not have any claims information, as it has been a drug that's been off the market for quite some time. Actually, that leads me to a question to the board. This drug is, oh, go ahead.
Yeah,
before I dive in.
thanks. Courtney, just to clarify, I don't believe Brenzavi's on the market, off the market. It just doesn't have much payer coverage. It's a low WAC branded drug.
Okay.
So it's on the market. It just doesn't have payer coverage.
Gotcha. Well, then I think I still will ask my question. For drugs that come up as therapeutic alternatives that do not have much coverage, does the board still want that information in the material packet, such as how you see this here? Or is it better just to remove it and just make a quick comment somewhere that this is a therapeutic alternative, but it does not apply, it does not have any cost impacts? Chair Bailey, I see your hand up.
Thank you for asking. I think it's important to show because as the market possibly moves more to this transparent pricing model or net pricing, I think it's still good to have the information there because while some of these drugs, if they don't have commercial coverage, if we shine light on the visibility of what the price of these drugs are, I think it still has an impact to the patient side of economics. So I would be inclined to leave drugs like this in. I think Brenzavi's kind of a really isolated incident, but that would probably be my personal opinion. But Dr. Hartung, you have the floor.
Oh, it was, hey man, I support that. I also wanted to flag that there's I believe there's a new generic in class for Farxiga, that's at least available on Cost Plus for like $10, a 30-day supply. So at least in my research last night, that was an alternative that's substantially less expensive.
I
And
believe
that
that's
was just
accurate.
for, yeah, so that was just for Farxiga though. That's the therapeutic alternative to Jardiance.
To Farxiga, it's the generic for I think Farxiga. He was just highlighting that for 2026. Dr.
Okay.
Hartung.
Correct, yeah. So just to round out all the therapeutic alternatives. It's
Yeah,
there, but
Michelle,
the
I think.
generic just came on it's like literally, it wouldn't be in this data set because it just
Yeah,
literally came out on the market this year's, but it's available.
appreciate that information. Yeah, Michelle, I see your hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the true generic of Farxiga came out in May. Previously, there was a branded generic. And I just wanted to go on the record and support Chair Bailey and Vice Chair Hartung's comments.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're setting up these material packets with as much meaningful information. If it's not meaningful to see the dashes in each of the tables, then that's just a small edit that we can make. But again, if it's the intention for the board to see that there's nothing either for out-of-pocket cost or for the system, you'll just see a gray line with the dashes through them. Yes, Chair Bailey, I see your hand up
Courtney,
again.
what I would like to clarify, so it sounds like we were all essentially talking the same thing. We were talking about true generics. Going back to the discussion I think we had last month, I think once we get into doing like therapeutic alternatives of these drugs, that is not the path we should go down, only when it's like a true generic. So like there's now a true generic of Farxiga. So if we had had that data available for that time period, we would have of course presented it. But back to our like last month discussion about drilling down like within a therapeutic alternative of the of the other drugs in the class, I think that is not a path we would go down. So I think I just wanted to reinforce that I think today we were talking about if there was a true generic, for example, for Farxiga, we would have added it, but not more complicated than that.
Okay.
And maybe I just
Thank you.
complicated it with that comment, but that was not my intention.
Now, I think that if that's the route where the board members, because again, when a clinician identifies what a alternative is to a drug according to the definition in our rule, that's how these therapeutic alternatives are identified. If the board wants to also include generics or therapeutics to the therapeutic alternatives, we'll have to figure out how to do that as we go into the next review cycles. Dr. Hartung, I see your hand up.
I think the issue, or one issue, is the fact that we have a 2-year-old look back period, and kind of all the analytics are focused on 2024, and so it just requires the kind of thought process that, okay, we're in 2026. These are all truly therapeutic alternatives. At the time, it was just branded products, but now just thinking like right now, do any of these things have generic alternatives? That's helpful to know. But again, it would just require it steps outside of this data set that we're using, essentially, to say what's the current landscape in any of that contextual information. So for the clinician who is consulted on this, that would be I think they would need to do.
Kind of like what's also going on currently. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, just to think about like, so, when I was looking at these things like in 2026, okay, what's the state of, are any of these generic? Like, is there any, some of these are on the Medicare price list. Jardiance has another data point that's kind of alluded to in here is like Jardiance was negotiated by CMS, and the new negotiated price comes into play this year. It's $197. I think, you know, that's somewhat, I think, helpful, adds context to like what are we paying in Oregon versus what did the federal government negotiate. So just kind of like we have the data, and then just moving beyond the data which is data, then moving beyond the data 2026, what are the kind of these other pieces I think are helpful.
All right, appreciate that. And we'll try to work on that. I think we've got to, with the smaller groups of drugs, we may have a little more time to be able to look into what's going on currently. And again, this is why we have the rolling packet. So if we find information, we can update them. Michelle, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Courtney. To add what Vice Chair Hartung said, in 2026, there was around over a 40% decrease in the WAC price of Jardiance due to the CMS price negotiation. So I just think it's important context, even though it's outside of the data set that we're reviewing, to include in the report.
Chair Bailey, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely agree with my peers. I mean, I think naturally, while last year when we voted, you know, we were looking at the data and working hard to stick with the information that was before us for the data. I do think qualitatively, as members are aware of some of these things, you know, certainly when people are making decisions, it probably can't help but influence some people's decision making. It may or may not. I think one thing, I agree that if we have more real-time info available, we may just note that just as a note, because it may help us take out drugs that maybe we don't feel the need to look into as much as we might want to spend more time on others. The one thing I would just kind of share for the record when we look, and I'm also kind of a fan of not diving into drugs that maybe the feds have already looked at, maybe noting that the feds have worked on it. I guess I would just also say that related to the feds, there was a new technology vendor created to facilitate the difference between the lower Medicare price and a pharmacy cost of goods. And that is something that we would just have to make sure that as we keep in mind what's going on federally, that at the state level at this time, we don't have what was called the Medicare Transition Facilitator, MTF, I think, or MFT. Like, we don't have the mechanism or the budget to be able to true up what might be a lower negotiated price and a cost of goods for, let's say, a pharmacy provider. So I know that's very technical, and it wasn't my intention to be technical. I just wanted to kind of state that for the record, that because the feds are able to do something, there would still be logistical limitations beyond laws and things like that that could make it difficult for us to do similar things. So it's a little bit of a tangent, but for the record, I just wanted to state that, because in Medicare, they now have a new process that they can implement throughout the whole country. But Michelle, you have the floor.
Thanks, Chair Bailey. That is true, but I do want to note that this is not only applying to Medicare at this point because of the WAC price reduction. There's compression across the commercial market as well.
I fully agree with you when the WAC is reduced, Michelle.
All right, I appreciate the statement, Chair Bailey, and the additional information, Michelle.
And Courtney, I guess I would caveat my comment then when there has not been a WAC reduction.
So kind of back to the material packets. I met with everyone, and my understanding is everybody has had opportunity to review the packets independently. Is there any section, like in Jardiance or any other packets, that the board would like to spend a little bit of time for discussion? Dr. Hartung.
I just want to talk about the equity components of the report.
Yeah.
And well, I definitely appreciate the work that went into here to start to provide some data insights on kind of demographic characteristics of patients, of the utilization. I think, and I know this is the first pass on this, and this is a great first pass, but I think there might be some, I'm trying to find distracted because I'm trying to find the place on my document here. I think there could be some basic things that could be improved. So I think, well, first and foremost, I think having, in addition to number of claims, putting number of individuals would be helpful across the board, both race, ethnicity, and sex. I guess we have it for ethnicity, but I don't see it
And we
for
have it for,
race.
yeah. So you have race. So these are claims for the race for each one broken down here. Oops.
Yeah, but can we get a number of enrollees?
So I can try, but there's also only like some enrollees only have like one or two.
Well,
And so we have to kind of be mindful of like how low that number should go.
you can probably, there's probably some guidelines around data cell size suppression that we can adhere to. CMS has some guidelines that we can adhere to.
Okay.
But yeah, I get that. And then contextual stuff, like I think I mentioned this in prior meetings about, in addition to having the data on utilization within these groups, having some sort of contextual basis for comparisons. Like if we have the APAC pharmacy file, just providing like, what are those demographics across the board, across all APAC patients, so we can better understand who's using, in this case, Jardiance versus the universe of APAC pharmacy utilizers. Because that's what we're trying to like assess, or at least I'm trying to like evaluate, like, are there equity issues in terms of who's using these drugs versus kind of who's in the population?
Yeah, and yeah, we've kind of talked about it last month too, and again, we're kind of restricted by time. We have a lot of information to put in the material packets. Not to say we can't work on it. I don't know if we can get to that granulation for this review cycle, but it can be something where we'll continue to improve on, just because it takes so much time to go in and write the code and clean and then pull everything. And often it's on the shoulders of Heather and as a data analyst. And so we're just trying to be mindful of the time impact. But this is what we were able to pull out for now. And I'm hoping that in some capacity, what has been presented will provide some sort of meaningful structure, which also leads me into the question about if the board members want to update the rubric for this section to either create a scoring component, because right now in the rubric it's put as a yes, no, if there's impact, or if the board members think that it'd be better to have it broke out across the scoring concept. But before you start answering that, I wanted to acknowledge Sarah's hands up.
Thanks, Courtney. I just wanted to build on what Dan was saying and emphasize, there are limits to what we can do in the next month for additional data analysis, but all of this feedback, so respecting those limits, at the same time, all the feedback that you have about what you want to see in future board packets is really, really helpful, especially specific suggestions about comparison data or ways to structure the analysis to be most useful. Because even if we can't do it for next month, we could definitely do it for next year. And we want to continue refining our processes both over this year's review cycle and then to set ourselves all up for greater success next year, to have a better developed process next year than we have this year. So want to respect those limitations and also encourage you to keep asking for what you need, because we will continue to work to develop those analyses and information resources.
Go ahead, Dr.
Yeah,
Harkin.
yeah. I mean, I get it. It takes a ton of work to do what you guys just did. And like I'm not suggesting that what I say goes, and I'm hoping like the board can have a conversation about like what's the like kind of the what we need, what information would be helpful in terms of refining this section. And I get there's a million other things in this report, but you asked for feedback. That's my feedback. I'm curious to what other people think about what's useful for them, because that's the big new section in these reports, and it's super interesting.
Well, thank you. And again, always looking to build on what will create the best analysis for the board to determine affordability concerns. Yeah, Laura, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to your earlier question. I do think we need to, have it become more than yes, no, and with the equity as we get more information, and be able to grade it based on numbers. The other thing I would say, I was very disappointed in the number of unknowns, and impacting the data.
It is not just the unknown, but some those refuse to answer also. But that's part of the collection through the APAC system. We're kind of limited to what is reported into those systems, and it's not truly clarified why. But again, but regarding the rubric, I could take a shot at it and create, like I have the rest of these, kind of create like a range for the board member to discuss next month, if that would be helpful. But I want to make sure everybody's in agreement that they want, like I've already heard from Lori, as far as it being useful to have the gradient. Any other feedback from board members about updating the rubric, or just keeping it as the yes, no? Dan, I see yours. Hands up.
Yes, I'm in agreement that I believe it would be useful to have the gradation. So 0 through 3 kind of score on this.
Okay. Thank you. So many changes. John, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I would add it with the scored section as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Michelle.
Is this an appropriate time to bring up another suggestion for the rubric?
Oh yeah, sure, it's a good time.
The last question about the CMS price negotiation.
Okay.
Sometimes when I read it, it's a little confusing to me, because it's like, is it excluded from price negotiation, or is it excluded from the list?
Okay, gotcha.
So could we say, is the drug included on the list? That would be a simple yes or no.
I think the intention is, if it's a yes, then because it's then higher the number.
Mm-hmm.
So how would we be able to phrase that to indicate a yes if it does show an impact? So basically, if it's a no, that means that the CMS is already reviewing it and looking at it. If it's a yes right now, then it's not being reviewed and it's not held to the fair market review. So, but again, we don't have to pan it out right now. I can definitely take it back and come up with some other phrasing to kind of match what that yes, no indication would be. Does that?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other feedback on the rubric while we're kind of on here? All right. I appreciate that guidance. And I will do some finessing with the numbers and see how I'm going to incorporate some of these health equity information into the scoring rubric. Always happy to listen to any suggestions. Otherwise, is there anything else that we can look at or talk about regarding the health equity updates or any other part of the packet? Is the health, oh, sorry, Lori, I didn't see your hand up. It's so whited out on my screen.
Yeah, so we're not seeing the 340B or the ERISA numbers here, correct?
That's correct. We do not have access into 340B or ERISA information.
And then I guess the other thing I think that Dan had brought up, Dan Hartung, earlier is maybe comparing the ethnic numbers in Oregon relative to the prescription numbers as a way to look at equity. In other words, is it consistent with this percentage of the population, or is it quite different?
Yeah, we'll work on trying to get the data a little better structured. Good. Yeah, Sarah, I see your hand.
Oh, I just wanted to follow up with a clarifying point on Lori's question about patients who got a prescription through a 340B participating pharmacy. We don't have any information in APAC about whether a claim was filled through a 340B participating pharmacy or not. However, if the patient was on Medicaid, we do have all of the Medicaid claims in APAC. So that includes both Medicaid claims that were filled through a 340B pharmacy and Medicaid claims that were filled through a community pharmacy or a different site. They're not, it doesn't, the APAC data don't distinguish which route that was. Because so I just want to make clear that we're not missing those claims in terms of number of claims or number of enrollees. We just can't tell which of those Medicaid claims were filled at a 340B pharmacy.
Chair
Thank you.
Bailey.
While it wouldn't get us all the way there, next year in our data call, there may be a way for us to request data from the E1 transaction, or not, isn't that the E1? Maybe Chris and Michelle, or John, you could help me, where you flag a potential 340B claim at the point of sale. It would not be, it would miss a lot, but so I can't say that it would be 100% accurate, but at least in pharmacy data, there is a mechanism where claims get flagged. It is not entirely perfect, but I would suspect in our data call, perhaps that's a field we would be able to request in the future. We just wouldn't be able to see the net 340B price because that would be confidential. But Michelle, your hand is raised. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Bailey. The transaction would be a submission clarification code of 20.
20. Okay. Yeah.
And the use of that is entirely voluntary. So I don't know that the data would be extremely useful.
Yeah, it'd be artificially low. Chris.
I wouldn't even say artificially, Chair Bailey. It is very rare, at least in the pharmacies that I am responsible for, and the other local pharmacies that I work with, we're not using that code at the moment.
Thank you. I mean, I guess the only way to kind of answer, I guess the other way is we have a clearinghouse model in the state. I just don't know if PDAB would be able to access data from that clearinghouse. Because if we could link that to the NDCs in reference, if there was a total volume based on the drug and then comparing it to the others, that could be one way of backing into, not that we're looking for the net number, but for the potential universe of claims. Again, Courtney, that's a parking lot thing. I'm not trying to derail us, but wanted to just mention that. Mr. Murray?
And I apologize, I don't know the behind the scenes actions, but our community pharmacies do, we do have third party or 340B contracts. And occasionally we assume the third-party administrator is catching all the claims that are transmitted through our system. Although I still get letters from PBM saying these 3 claims that you filled last month or last week should be 340B claims. We go to do the research. I guess they're correct, but our third-party administrator didn't catch them. I don't know about the validity of the data. That's why I guess maybe it's more of a question than a concern as far as data collection goes. I guess I would worry a little bit.
And that's part of the challenge with data, right? We're already piecemealing together multiple data sets to make what we currently have. And so trying to add in more would take some time, right? And to understand the validity behind it, like what we're going to get out of it versus in comparison of the time and how we would do it. But not to say that we can't look into it. Chair Bailey, I think that you provided, a good suggestion with the clearinghouse. We can check out what
Yeah,
the
we'd have to
options are.
check other divisions at the state, but I mean, obviously, when we talk just about affordability and access, I mean, clearly 340B isn't for multiple reasons, an important piece of that discussion. And it would, to the best of our ability, just kind of knowing how many claims go through for these drugs, I think is an important data element. Again, not something we can do this year, possibly not even something we can do next year, but I think it's an important piece of the puzzle if part of our intention with these packets is to educate and inform, then that I do think to the extent that we are able, it's something we shouldn't lose sight of.
Right. Appreciate the conversation and the feedback. Any other comments from the board?
Courtney or Mr. Layman, your hand was raised, so you have the floor.
Oh, thanks, Chair Bailey. Courtney, I mean, it doesn't seem like we're having a ton of, well, I have a question just about conceptually how you're gonna score the equity piece when almost like this is a perfect example. If you scroll up on that ethnicity piece, 50% or almost 50%, I mean 45% are unknown. So like how do we take that and create a score when almost half of them we don't know their ethnicity, I guess. And maybe that's a question for us after you put something in front of us. I just don't know how, like that's going to be hard for me to get to a point where I put a number there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's gonna be a fun project for me to work on. I will say that. I see it. I understand that it's gonna be a challenge. I think that's again, I think I have to just work with the numbers and come up with what I'm seeing, and then bring something to the board before we actually solidify it into the rubric. So we'll do that. Michelle, I see your hand up.
Thanks. One of the things that really stood out to me in these packets was the data on the number of claims per enrollee and linking that to the comments received at the end of the packets, which to me suggests potential issues with abandonment due to cost. And so I don't know if there's any way we can tease that out a little bit more.
So enrollee paid per claim.
The number of claims filled per enrollee.
Oh.
So, if
Yeah.
for a chronic medication, if somebody only filled their prescription 2 or 3 times in a year, are they not filling that? Can we make a link that they're not filling due to cost constraints? And for Medicare, we can't because of the transition fills, but for other payers, I think that's something that really stood out to me in these packets was the low number of claims per enrollee in a year's period.
Yeah, I'd have to probably lean into Heather and how she sees the data if that's something that we could pull. But I see Sarah and Dan, her tongue's hand was up. Sarah, go ahead.
One consideration I just wanted I think that's a great question, Michelle. One thing I have certainly asked before is, are there ways we can get data on prescriptions that were made but not filled? Which, of course, is asking about a negative, so is not something we can do through claims data. Another thing to keep in mind when interpreting these averages, and Heather and I could chat about if there's maybe some additional ways to cut the data that are in APAC. We have to keep in mind that not all of these enrollees were enrolled in a plan for 12 months. So the average also reflects people who had coverage for 3 months and moved out of state after that, or, lots of other life circumstances that can lead to people changing their coverage type. And we only get the data from that person for the time period that they were in an APAC reporting plan. So it's one of the things that makes interpreting claims data more complicated.
Yeah, Chris, I see your hand up.
Michelle, could you tie that back to equity? Like if you knew the number of enrollees based on race and you knew the number of claims based on race and you just do some simple math there, I mean, would that tie out to show, I mean, I don't know if that is a way to look at it, but it seems to me like that would be very interesting to know, hey, when they classify themselves as Black or African American, they fill half the number of claims that somebody in the white category has. I'm not an expert in this. That's just a general question for you or Dr. Hartog.
I didn't look at it from an equity perspective. I looked at it from a payer type perspective. And I noted that there were a larger number of claims per enrollee for Medicaid enrollees who have a $0 copay. But I think, to Sarah's point, the eligibility, nuances are an issue, and one way to get around that is to only include individuals who have continuous eligibility throughout that time period, if that's possible through APAC data.
And I think, again, Michelle, kind of going back that we just have to go look at the data again and see if there's anything for most likely the next review. If you could find some, like the easy button to quickly update to provide the information, but definitely consideration for the next review cycle. Yes, Dr. Harton.
I mean, my perspective is that, I think all this stuff is possible. But it gets very complicated very fast. And, you think about these, we have yearly cuts of data where, maybe patients are starting the drug in November. And so they have 2 fills in that year. And so you have this cross section of people. Some people have been continuously using it for years and maybe they continue on for 12 months. Some people start at the end of the year and they have a couple months. Some people lose eligibility. We have this huge heterogeneous mix of people using these drugs. And you see this playing out in the cost data too. You have a lot of times the median out-of-pocket cost is like $5, but the average is like, I don't know, in the hundreds of dollars. So we have patients who are very high utilizers of these drugs who are using it probably the whole year, and they have their deductible, their cost sharing, maybe they hit their caps. It's all mixing together in these out-of-pocket totals for the year. And then you have someone who maybe has 1 fill in their high deductible period, and if they're in the commercial, and so their out-of-pocket costs, per prescription is very. So, I think all these things flood my mind when I hear about these discussions and trying to like tease out all these important details about what's going on. And I just wonder in terms of you know, the capacity of staff to do some of this stuff, to the time to do some of this stuff, I think is pretty limited. So that would be my kind of concerns about going down some of these paths. Not to say they're definitely worthwhile, but I just, you know, they may just lead to more questions and ambiguity.
Thank you, Dan, for saying that. I appreciate it. Sarah, I see your hand.
Yeah, same as Courtney said. Really, thank you, Dr. Hartung, for recognizing those challenges. I would say that is where it is really helpful to staff to have your feedback as board members about which data points, which analysis, which pieces of information do you find most helpful in indicating concerns, again, you know, for both parts of the Oregon PDAB's mandate, both concerns around indicators around high out-of-pocket costs for patients, and then indicators around affordability challenges for the Oregon healthcare systems. So, you know, if you can provide us feedback about like which analyses are the highest priority, that could really help us staff you most effectively. So just want to keep reiterating that, given how complicated some of these questions are.
Trying to find, I think that this has all been a really great conversation, and I appreciate all of the feedback and highlights. You know, these drugs were reviewed in the last review cycle, and trying to find if I can pull up that drug list just to have a comparison. Hold, please. I don't know if this is helpful to the board members, but let me get this aligned. Just so you can see a comparison. Understanding that the format has changed a little bit. Is it more meaningful to see the APAC, the gross cost, or the net cost of information?
I try to look at net as much as possible.
Oh. Well, let's see what we got for net for this. Oh. So I pulled this up side by side. So this one here is Jardiance of 2025 review, Jardiance of 2026 review. Is there anything within, when you're looking at these comparatively, that would create a flag or a topic to discuss why we're all here? Dr. Hartung, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, this is good. I spent a fair amount of time going back and forth between this year's and last year's, especially on these drugs, because these drugs are growing fast. We haven't got to Mounjaro, but it basically doubled in total spend and utilization from 2024 or 2023 to 2024. And I think that's the kind of seeing where things are going is helpful. And you know, flipping between documents is very tedious, and because there's slight variations, it's also time consuming and confusing. So if there's gonna be some modifications in these documents, having some sort of two data point comparisons of the same data was helpful for me in understanding trajectories here.
Okay. So I did, just based off of your comment, full Mounjaro. Let me get down.
I mean, my notes say, I mean, on the commercial side, which is where I focus on, we went from 10 million in spend to 27 million in spend on the commercial side. More than doubling the utilization. And that generally reflects the total spend, but so when, you know, and there was also acceleration of Ozempic, but it wasn't as great.
Mm-hmm. Even the paid went up quite a bit over 1 year. So you had, this is 2026. We had quite a few more enrollees according to the APAC information.
Yeah, I think it's driven by more people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
utilization.
Yeah, more claims too. Which is still, but it does show a cost per claim to be slightly reduced by a couple dollars.
The
But
rebates are about the same.
yeah.
From year to year. So those are the types of things that I look at in terms of like track, you know, seeing how things are changing.
Mm-hmm. So rebate showed to be about 52% for this year and 46.8 for last year. So yeah, Michelle.
I know we don't get net pricing in the APAC data, but I'm wondering if there's a possibility of just qualitatively asking the carriers in APAC what their average discount is for these drugs to see if it's similar to the data carrier. Can we assume that all of the carriers in APAC have around a 50% discount?
Sarah, you want to answer that one for Ray?
So the APAC is not something we can ask. We can't send requests to the carriers that report to APAC. There's regulations and processes established by the Oregon Health Authority that require insurance carriers that meet criteria to report their data into the APAC system. But for each year's report, those are established data fields. And we don't, there's not a way to go back to reporting entities and ask them for updates. Now, longer term, I mean, OHA does review their APAC data collection processes and update them over time. So certainly, and I mean, we would need to go kind of compare the holes in the data that from 2024 that we're looking at to the latest reporting guidance for APAC, but we could certainly, PDAB could certainly make suggestions to OHA about improving APAC data collection. But we can't really go backwards to prior years.
And Chair Bailey.
I mean, wouldn't the answer from APAC be that a lot of those rebates are proprietary between the plan and the PBM? And I mean, go toward their calculation for the, capitated rate, but like, I would think that they would frame that as proprietary with their PBM partner, but that's just my initial thoughts. Dr. Hartung?
I mean, how I approach this issue is that we have this information from the commercial carriers, and yeah, it's not perfect, but at least it's like some insight into like what commercial rebates are. And so I kind of hold it in two things in my head, saying, these drugs are getting about a 50% rebate, which jives with reality, I think, in terms of more agents, more competition. There's incredible price pressure on these drugs with, Trump RX and all sorts of all of the other things going on. So, these 50% rebates kind of seem real on the commercial side. I think Medicaid is a whole different, and we don't have any purview over Medicaid, and they're getting the better rebates probably, and Medicare is doing its own thing. So, I really focus on the commercial side of things. I don't know if I don't know if that's inappropriate or appropriate, but that's how I handle it cognitively.
Yeah, Chair Bailey.
Well, Dr. Hartung, I think you bring up a good point because, I typically look at commercial because you assume that obviously on the Medicaid side, it's improved from what the commercial is. But when we kind of went back to like sharing things that are going on in the market, and how that is just, may or may not impact our decision on some of these drugs. To your point, Dr. Hartung, about like Trump RX, I would encourage us to look at kind of thinking to your point about what could the net essentially rebate be, like just looking at what the D2C pricing is on programs like GoodRx, or to your point, Trump RX, they're actually strategically linked. You'll see that on Ozempic and some of these drugs, the D2C price is $199 or $299 depending on dose. So then you're like, okay, well, if it's that price D2C, it's highly likely that on the payer side, to your point, Vice Chair Dr. Hartung, one would expect that the rebate is going to be somewhat similar to what these new D2C prices are. So just for visibility to my peers, I'd like to share that, to your point, on the D2C side, a lot of these prices are just falling very quickly, and you would expect sophisticated purchasers would have rebates that are relatively in alignment with that.
Thank you for that information, Chair Bailey. Yeah, the complexity with APAC is that it's a data request that we have to get from OHA. We're kind of limited because it's a very large data set when it comes over to us. And so we, we get what we can. And the more that we get comfortable using the APAC, we can start requesting more to kind of fill in some of these gaps. But the discounts, rebates, those kind of things are considered proprietary, and I don't believe that they can be requested from the APAC. So again, something we can look into, but that's why we do the data call to primarily get in that, the price concession component through the data call. John, I do see your hand up.
Concerning the data and material packet, last month we had a discussion, and I think I was hoping to hear an answer maybe on specificity on carrier name level information. And, we keep getting information, which I agree with, from the public saying that affordability is determined by a number of things, including, changing in costs and step therapy and prior authorization processes and things like that. And my question is, are we able to get carrier level data from the commercial carriers, name specific, so that we can see some of these things? We have just a limited number of people or companies that report. We have a limited number in Oregon. So I'm curious to know what the information that came back on that was. What was the ruling, please?
Sarah, you want to answer?
I'll go ahead and take that one. And recognize that we owe you additional written follow-up, Chair Bailey. We haven't forgotten that request, but we've been quite busy getting these packets ready for today's meeting. Unfortunately, John, we cannot report carrier level data from the data call. that we essentially get, PDAB essentially gets the data call by leaning on our DFR colleagues for their authority to request information from health insurance carriers as part of the commissioner's regulation of health insurance, the insurance commissioner's regulation of health insurance. And there are some limitations on how much identifiable information can be made public from those data calls. So unfortunately, we cannot report, per plan or per carrier. We can only report the data call in aggregate.
Yeah, thank you for asking that, Mr. Murray and Sarah, for your answer. Yeah, I feel like in the past there was some packet, and I'll have to go back and look at all the packets all the way back to the second year, I guess I was doing that. Because I feel like there was a world where we did see it, and it may have been specific, it may have been a different use case, because I think, we have the carriers that report to the DPT. So we have that information for the carriers that report to DPT. I mean, the other thing I would say related to whoever gave PDAB the formal answer is that this information related to plan design would be publicly available documents anyways. So I recognize it could be a administrative lift to ask PDAB staff to go scour the internet and find these answers themselves. But if it's already public facing plan design materials, and if DPT receives it, I guess I'm still just at a loss.
So
But I guess in my written response, I guess it'd be helpful when I receive the written response, it's probably good to post that just for visibility to our board website as well.
the claims data are not public. Like, yeah, some and some of the other plan design questions might be a little bit different. Again, the data for DPT are collected under different statutory authority than the insurance commissioner's inquiry authority, which is what we use to collect the data call. So they just have different restrictions on them. So it's possible that carrier level information you saw in the past might have been drawn from the DPT data reports.
Yeah, it could, because as people are likely aware, I do try to come prepared to things. So possibly I was crosswalking it with the publicly facing DPT data.
Mhm.
So I will write this down for the policy section of our discussion, but I would feel strongly that when we have a policy discussion, that we ask to make sure our use case includes that, because again, it would seem to me that we have had discussions in the past about how to make publicly available data included in these packets. So while the DPT use case is different, if it's publicly available data, I still struggle with understanding why it could not be legally presented to us in our packets.
So the sources of the numbers on the page that Courtney is showing is the data call, but those numbers are not publicly available.
Okay,
'Cause they're
well,
claims data.
I guess I'll table it, yeah, for the policy discussion
Yeah.
period. Because I mean, obviously utilization and all of these things have a very strong link to plan design, right? So we might find that one carrier, clearly plan design is making it where there's a lot of, and it's not meant to be punitive, right? It's meant to just be visible, because there could be carriers that are really making certain drugs accessible to the public at an affordable cost, and we would clearly want to highlight that where we see it in the data. So I guess I will just go back and relook at all the DPT stuff and then table my further comments for the policy discussion section.
I mean, please ask all of the questions.
Yeah, well, Vice Chair or Mr. Murray, thank you for mentioning it, because I think it was an important piece of our previous month's discussion. So when we get our formal response, I think it would be appropriate to post that just as a public document on the board website.
Sounds good. Thanks, Chair Bailey. Any other comments about or feedback, discussion regarding any of the other drugs? I did pull a comparison for Ozempic since it's our other packet. So this is Ozempic 2026. As Dan kind of mentioned, Mounjaro had kind of the biggest change, whether discounts or just utilization, but Ozempic stay about the same. Again, this is just a comparison between the 2 years. And yes, Dan, I understand that it would be very simple to have that one-page comparison. I wanted to have that happen, right? Kind of a trending price roll for year over year. But it would have entailed a lot of changes to the material packet, and we had a small amount of time to get the information in. So it might be something I can work on over the next couple of weeks or next couple of months before we finalize the material packet, so that when it does come to the review, you might have a cheat sheet or something where you can kind of see where significant differences are. But with that, anything else regarding like the anti-diabetics? I did want to spend a little time with insulin before we transition over to the next agenda item.
Hey, Courtney, before this isn't on insulin, but this is on GLP-1s because we've previously had some discussions about just market dynamics, and we've shared some visibility on D2C pricing and things. I think the other thing I would note, and it's somewhat, I guess, linked to policy too, but just for visibility, on July 1st, Medicare is launching their balance program for GLP-1s, where Medicare qualifying Medicare recipients will be able to receive GLP-1s for an out-of-pocket payment of $50. So that'll be the max. So when we look at like what out-of-pocket is for some of these GLP-1s, for Medicare beneficiaries, it'll be $50. It is a pilot, but I think that when you think of things that have been done at both the state and federal level, like cap the copay on insulin and things, I just think that's a market force that would be appropriate to reference in the GLP-1 section. Again, that goes live on July 1st. But I kind of thought of that when I'm thinking of policy things related to copays or out-of-pocket expenses and things. Again, federal, not state.
And it's still good to know that.
But we're talking about IRA and I mean, all those types of things. But I think that is a very meaningful, not on the plan affordability side. Obviously, there's the balance model that Medicaid can do on that side, but on the out-of-pocket affordability, that's a massive opportunity for some Medicare beneficiaries. I know $50 out-of-pocket is still unaffordable to many, but for many, it puts it at a price point that might make drugs available to them that were not otherwise available.
Understood.
But
Dr. Harcum.
Yeah, I mean, on a related note, I also wanted to note that in 2027, the Medicare negotiated price for Ozempic goes into effect at $274 for a 30-day supply. So again, I like to note these Medicare prices, just to, in particular, contrasting that with what the commercial with rebate price is, to kind of as opportunity. I feel like there are opportunities for the board to highlight that at least our commercial payers aren't getting the whatever the net price that the Medicare program is getting. I think that's an opportunity for us to flag that for the legislature and say, hey, these people over there are getting a lower price. We should do the same thing here in Oregon. So for our commercial people.
Anything else around the GLP-1s? I really do appreciate the conversation and highlight of kind of what is coming to market what's going to happen. I know that we run off of couple year data difference, but I think the conversations are still meaningful for the board. Before I turn over to the insulin, any other comments? All right, hearing none. Oh, maybe. So the insulin, what I wanted to point out is, again, insulin doesn't have any therapeutic alternatives, and it's all based off of one NDC for each of the products. So I wanted to provide the board members with an opportunity to have any discussion about the insulin product. Just knowing that it's probably the most up-to-date information based off of one NDC for each of them. I don't have any specific questions. I just wanted to give the board an opportunity to see if there was any additional feedback. And I guess hearing none, if there's no more questions, comments, or discussion needed for the material packets, I can hand it back to you, Chair Bailey.
Thank you, Courtney. And while I've been sitting here the whole time, I somehow misplaced my meeting guide notes. But I do want to reference that we will go ahead and take a 5-minute break. So we will be back here in 5 minutes. So Melissa, if you could just call a quick roll just to see that we have board members in attendance before we move forward with Lou and his presentation.
Yes, Chair Shelley Bailey,
Present.
Vice Chair Dan Hartung,
Present.
Lori Hoagland,
Present.
Dan Kennedy,
Present.
Michelle Coder,
Present.
Chris Lehman,
Present.
John Murray.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Melissa. I would now like to call Lou Savage, the Consumer Engagement Coordinator for PDAB, to talk to us about the PDAB community forums and outreach projects. So Lou, welcome, and you have the floor to provide us with a presentation and an update.
Thank you, Chair Bailey. Thanks to everybody for letting me chat with you for a little bit. You know, the project that I kind of parachuted in to help with is the second time that the board has done this. First thing I want to say is how much we appreciate the board's participation in the outreach effort. It was notable by the folks who came to the forums that board members were there and they engaged folks. So it's really, really important that you did this. And I know it's time out of your schedule, but I really think it was well worth your having been at the meetings and participated with folks. So the outreach effort that we did was, as I said, was the second one that we conducted. The first one was a couple of years ago. Next slide, please, Melissa. The effort we did the first time was kind of a short time frame. We really only had about 6 weeks, and again, this was a couple of years ago. We got started late. We really didn't think we did enough advertising or networking to get a good response. So this year we did have a longer runway. We did extensive advertising and networking. We did outreach to state legislators, over 1,300 emails, nearly 800 postal mailings, media outreach, social media. So we really did a lot to advertise the forums that we were putting on. And people did hear about the forums through all of these various outlets. They said to us, "Well, yeah, that's why we were there." Here are the dates and the venues. The goal was to have the forums completed by the time that the board began its review process. So it was a compressed time frame. Really, it all was completed within about 6 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks. I'll talk a little bit about the attendance, but really the focus of the comments were around the insurance issues, insurance denials on specific prescription drugs or changes in their health insurance policies that limited their choices. And as I mentioned, the participation was not what we'd hoped for. The number of attendees who came to listen or tell their stories was slightly less than 100. The total participants, including staff and other folks, was slightly less than 120. So the board has provided feedback forms, as we talked about earlier in the meeting. They're both structured and open-ended response options, similar to surveys about the prescription drugs on the 2026 review list. The forms include a list of medications the board's reviewing, questions about dosage, treatment, effectiveness, length of time on the medication, out-of-pocket costs, insurance coverage, a place for respondents to share additional feedback. We have reached out to a number of different groups, patients, caregivers, and advocacy groups, individuals with scientific training, manufacturers, safety net clinics, pharmacy benefit managers, and insurance companies. And when I say reached out, I really mean both let folks know, but also had it available that hopefully people heard about through other sources. So the forum for patients and caregivers and advocacy groups is translated into Spanish, Korean, Vietnamese, and Chinese. As of June 5th, the board has received 31 responses from patients, caregivers, and patient advocates about the prescription drugs that the board is reviewing. And those comments are actually part of the report that you can take a look at. And as Sarah mentioned, the forms are going to be available, throughout the review process up until later this summer. Next slide, Melissa. So the staff, I think, really engaged in extensive outreach efforts to make Oregonians aware of the community forums. And these efforts began in early February and continued through April and May. And it was, as I mentioned earlier, was kind of a multi-pronged effort. And, while the additional outreach efforts and improvements can always be made, we could do other things. The low attendance at the forums was really not primarily the result of poor promotion. Some other factors could have contributed to the low turnout at the forums. And it could have been the dates that we selected. It could have been the time that we selected, as well as the location. But in speaking to community members and other agency staff and nonprofit outreach staff, I really think that expecting a significant number of consumers and patients to attend a forum with a single focus just may be overly optimistic. So really think that the board should explore a different approach to engaging Oregonians. we're recommending that the board use a different strategy for future consumer outreach efforts. And so we've got a few tactics that we would think that you should consider for future outreach efforts. And the first is to continue to provide a limited number of online community forums. We think it is critical to have some input to the board at the beginning of the annual drug review process. So it's really an important element of your process, and it provides you with some timely feedback about the financial challenges that patients and consumers are having. But 7 forums and the 1 online board meeting really produced limited input on the drugs under review, particularly compared to the staff time and resources needed to host these events. So we recommend that the board sponsor 2 online forums and dedicate 1 online board meeting for public input near the beginning of the board's annual review process, like we did this year. To supplement that, we think that the board should partner with community organizations, state and local agencies to identify opportunities to engage Oregonians throughout the year. There really are a number of opportunities for the board to attend existing events, connect with Oregonians about the high cost of prescription drugs. And some of these events are health related. Others could be focused on specific communities that have specific health needs. So we recommend that in coordination with outside organizations and the Division of Financial Regulation, to create an annual calendar to identify existing events where PDAB representatives can be present to engage Oregonians. Well, and a part of that, we think you should consider the creation of a speakers bureau with PDAB executive director and the board participating in that. One of the positive outcomes for this year's forums was a connection with several representatives from patient support groups. And PDAB staff has also been in contact with several hospital systems to learn about their patient support groups. There may be opportunities to be present at meetings with patient support groups and other civic groups. And we realize that your time is very limited, as is Sarah's. But even a small number of events during the year that either board members and or the director can participate in really gives increased visibility and feedback. So we recommend that PDAB really advertise the availability of the director and board members to a limited extent, be available, to discuss PDAB and its work. And, staff could develop an internal process to respond to speaking requests and to provide support for board members who are willing to speak occasionally at community events. We think that you should continue to engage pharmacists, medical clinics, and advocacy groups. They have been very helpful in both the 2024 and 2026 forums. They are a resource to use, and we recommend that you continue to notify the pharmacies, medical clinics, and professional organizations, as well as advocacy groups, directly with mailings and emails. Continue to use GovDelivery, and particularly during the drug review process, provide the feedback forms in the mailings to make them available to consumers, patients, and members of advocacy organizations, and to use pharmacies and medical professionals as a real resource to distribute those feedback forms. And finally, and I think most importantly, view the consumer feedback as a year-round process. It's been important to have the feedback forms and the forums as part of the drug review process It's really a critical element of that. But, giving Oregonians the opportunity to provide both structured and open-ended feedback, throughout the year, I think provides additional really valuable input to the board. And as PDAB changes its outreach strategy beyond its sponsored forums, having accessible feedback platforms and a system to compile public input, I think is really important to give patients and consumers that assurance that their voices are heard throughout the year. So we recommend that a general feedback form be available as well year-round. And it could combine a structured and open-ended response as well. And that would be in addition to the more focused feedback form that the board would use, during that drug review process. So really looking for your input and guidance. And again, your participation has really been important. It sends a really strong message to the community that you're interested in what they have to say. And, the dialogue that took place at the forums, your discussions with members of the community was really important. So thanks for this opportunity. And again, looking for some guidance as we move forward. Okay.
Lori, your hand was raised.
Yeah, I'm thinking about a lot of the medications that we are reviewing are related to arthritis, dermatology, diabetes, and neurology, and wondering if we didn't target some of the professional meetings in the state might be also helpful.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that comment. Thanks for that comment. We did reach out to some support groups. I spoke to the diabetes group in Salem. It was actually pretty well attended. But to your point, I think targeting those professional groups, we did send mailings to them, but targeting those professional groups, I think, is a really, really good idea.
Chair Dr. Hartung or Mr. Murray?
Can you remind me, how are we engaging? It says continue to engage pharmacies, medical clinics, advocacy groups. How are we engaging these entities to elicit feedback?
Well, it is primarily through email and letters. We, to the prior point, we have not actually shown up to any of those meetings, and it's really a resource issue. Both. I think, as I think most of you know, I kind of parachute in, and I'm not a full-time staff member. So I've been here since, late last year, so a few months. We meaning PDAB does not have a permanent outreach staff member. We use the Division of Financial Regulation outreach staff when we can. As you probably saw, when we did our forums, they have a laundry list of items that they are responsible for. PDAB is one item on the list. So one of the things that we need to do if we are going to be doing more extensive outreach is to decide how we were going to do that. To Sarah's credit, she has been available, to help out with this. And certainly Melissa has pulled the heavy oar as well. But, having more outreach is really important. We have to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics of, and I'm not an expert in this area at all, but I don't know if it's at all feasible to, I know we have these flyers that we distribute through various mechanisms, but really working with pharmacies and clinics to, make sure that they're visible and having some sort of, that has some language about, if you have issues affording your medications, give us feedback through some QR codes or something like that. So, people who are engaged in the healthcare system, in these avenues, have a low bar way for them to provide feedback if they want to. I don't know if that's already been done.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we should lean in more to the feedback forms themselves. Because I'm after two of these rounds, and listening to other folks who've done this work, had a really interesting conversation with Osberg. They they do this sort of work for their advocacy, and regardless of how much you advertise, people are just not willing to come to a single topic event. So, as I mentioned earlier, on the, in-person stuff, I think, coordinating and partnering with other organizations is probably the way to go. But to your point, I think leaning into the feedback forms and figuring out a way to get those distributed, to a wider community, I think is part of that, should be part of that approach. That makes sense to me.
Mr. Murray?
Thank you. I would echo strongly what Vice Chair Hartung has just commented on and asked questions on. Engaging with the pharmacists and the medical clinics on the ground where people encounter their unaffordable medications from month to month and certainly from year to year is important. But the structuring of the form, the way the question is asked, as open-ended as possible with QR codes, making it as simple as possible to respond back, is important. And I think there would be more patient involvement directly from the patients if we provided those things. And of course, engaging with advocacy groups that are already fighting for their people that might belong to that, whether disease-oriented or otherwise, would be useful to get their help, outreach to them. So thank you.
And Mr. Murray, just to add some additional color or insights, based on comments from last year, Melissa did send digital flyers, kind of the version you see in the packet, to the pharmacies. But now that we're exploring new way, and that was a comment I felt strongly about, so we sent it to all the pharmacies that we essentially had on record from all the work we had done previously related to Senate Bill 192 and all those listening sessions. But I think one way we may want to discuss like budgeting of the budget we had to expend on this. Personally, I think I'd be a fan of not just providing the flyer to pharmacies, because we know every pharmacy's workflow is different, but to the extent that maybe we could identify higher volume pharmacies or pharmacies in areas where there's like a lot of equity concerns, maybe we could also use some of our budget to provide what they call those Iron Man signs. I mean, I know what they range wholesale on, like the signs you literally see when you're standing in line, because I think the existing collateral we have, if you are standing in line and as a patient and having an affordability challenge, or you get told you need a prior auth or whatever you get told, if there's like not just a flyer, but like literally signage that you could scan the QR code and provide feedback. Personally, I think that we could get a lot of really rich data. And I don't know our budgeting process for next year, but if we could get on that sooner than later, maybe we would even approach how we looked at things next year differently based on feedback we receive. But I think it's less likely pharmacies make the flyer visible, but if we could partner in a way that would make it more visible, and that could include with FQHCs and other advocacy partners we already hear from and work with, but to the extent that our budget allows, maybe that would really get us rich feedback to use for the future. But Ms. Hoagland, I see your hand is raised, so you have the floor.
The other thing is, and I've brought this up in the past, if we could work with some of the computer systems, Ocean, whatever, to have a better way of alerting providers about their patients not picking up medicines. I think that it would be more in your face as far as what the issues are. Working in primary care, I can say that oftentimes it isn't easy to find out who didn't pick up their medicine or why they didn't pick up their medicine. And it feels like it could be, some kind of fix in the system where we would be having to face that in our inbox and deal with it more aggressively.
That's a good point. I appreciate that.
Sarah?
Thanks, Chair Bailey. A couple of things I wanted to reflect back to folks from this conversation. One, to your comment, Lori, about improving the clinician notification loop around prescriptions that are not picked up. That would be the kind of thing that would, I think, be appropriate as part of the policy recommendation discussion, because really doing something like that statewide would likely require some program and policy development. So just kind of flagging for you that that's might be the most effective way to approach that kind of a concept. And certainly the PDAB has a platform to talk about those challenges. I guess another piece, and kind of looking especially to the board members who have community pharmacy experience and patient care experience, I really respect that both our primary care clinicians and our pharmacists and the support staff on all of those teams are all very busy people with a lot of demands on their time. So I want to make sure that any requests that we are making or any outreach we are doing fits with their existing demands and is done in such a way that it's really respectful of their existing workflows and doesn't add to their burdens. So I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I want to recognize that that's a challenge that we want to keep in mind, and that your recommendations are really helpful to us as staff about how we should implement some of those ideas. Finally, I guess I want to ask the question, or kind of more pointedly ask the question Lou suggested. Are board members, or some of the board members, interested in being available for speaking events throughout the year? It is certainly something that staff would help support you in. And I realize everyone has different demands on their time. So, but is that something some of you are interested in exploring how we might make happen?
Sarah, I think it was a great suggestion from Lou. For any that have participated in ones that I've been a part of, it's the best part of the work we do is hearing from people and trying to contribute in both a scalable, meaningful way, but also at a personal level. So it's something that I always have an interest in helping where I can. But there's lots of other hands raised, so hopefully lots of other good feedback.
I was just gonna say, I'm happy to help as well. Be a speaker for our programs.
We've got more and more. I don't know who was up next. Mr. Murray, I think I saw you first, so your hand is raised.
Yeah, I would also be willing to do that. It would probably have to be Zoom, I guess, much like our meetings, because I live so far out in Eastern Oregon. But
Mr. Kennedy?
Yeah, I have fewer time demands myself personally than other individuals, so I would be happy to do so. And I personally really enjoy the face-to-face meeting, especially with patients and chatting with patients. It's a very effective means.
And Mr. Lehman.
Yeah, Chair Bailey, I had just a slight question about one of Lou's recommendations about the more generic form, because I
yeah,
think
go ahead
that
with
could
the
be
question.
really helpful if we were out in the community. I mean, the QR code is one thing, but if we had sort of a generic year-round form where they could write concerns about the cost of medications, it would allow us maybe not to get specific data on Jardiance or another med that we're reviewing at the time, but it would give us more information about some of the things that they're struggling with. I feel like that could be helpful. And if we were out in the community and could just hand them something and then take it back and send it to staff or something, that seems like there could be value or benefit to that. And I would be happy to be part of something like that.
So you can tell we have a lot of people who don't like to talk to people, obviously. But no, Mr. Lehman, I agree fully that I apologize. I didn't clarify that when I was referencing it, but I think to your point, a more free text form maybe is just if we're going to have a year-round thing, because again, we may get feedback if we're looking at patient affordability or patient access that may not be related specifically to copays. That would give us very meaningful information to, we may look at things and approach things completely different based on that type of feedback. Vice Chair Dr. Hartung.
Just brainstorming here as well, but as I'm faculty here at Oregon State University, we have an ever-changing dynamic group of students who are always matriculating future pharmacists going out in the community. And I think that they are, as part of their educational efforts, they're always out in the community doing community outreach in a variety of health related issues, equity issues, things like that. And so I'm not, I'm just thinking there are probably opportunities for some sort of synergies in terms of like maybe recruiting some students who have interests in these issues from our college to go out and kind of communicate our message as well. So I'll look into that, but I just was thinking just creatively about other ways we can kind of leverage some of the things that I have some access to here.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We'll sign up more of the university students to help support us, right? And we've heard in public comment, I think we've heard from university students as well who have a passion for helping make a meaningful impact related to affordability and accessibility. But Mr. Kennedy, your hand is raised, so you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Chair Bailey. I was just thinking perhaps we could create some sort of self-addressed stamped postcard response system so people could fill it out pretty easily and slip it in the mail and it would go directly to the PDAB staff. Seems like that would be an easy out. And a postcard would be relatively inexpensive too.
That's a good idea. Looks like your hand was raised again. Oh,
Nope.
Okay. Any other board members with ideas related to kind of scalable outreach that might give us rich feedback? Obviously, we do get patient engagement surveys from individuals that provide us with feedback as well that I know personally I review, but everyone that sends us letters, sends us oral testimony, sends us links is all part of the educational and informational process from my perspective. Any other things about, so I guess, I mean, part of it, maybe I would ask Sarah or Lou, like, is there a timeline that we might be thinking if we want to pivot how we would be doing things? Is this something that we could run, that we could, like, do we have the budget to start making some of these modifications relatively, like, in real time, so that maybe we have more engagement information in front of us before the next time we look at how, we want to do these affordability reviews? Because again, I'm assuming there's a budget limitation, there's a labor limitation, there's like all sorts of process limitations, but I guess I'd be interested in what could that type of timeline look like, and when might the board be able to receive an update on, based on all this, what is a reasonable action plan for, I think realistically for 2027,
Well,
but
yeah.
starting now to enrich 2027.
And Chair Bailey, yeah, sort of the 2027 timeframe is certainly my target. This is our first discussion about these recommendations with the board, so we wanted to start by bringing it to you and getting your feedback on this direction. Sounds like what I'm taking from this conversation is that these recommendations that Lou put forward really do make sense to you, and that you would like staff to work on operationalizing and implementing these ideas. Our biggest limit is probably our small team and our limited time, while we ensure that we provide you all the support you need for the drug review process over the next several months. But as time allows, we will definitely start start developing some operational strategies around these concepts, and we can provide updates. Probably won't have very much to update you on in July, but we can provide updates at future board meetings, and definitely start thinking through what kind of, again, what operational processes we would want to set up to have a standing process for community members to invite a PDAB speaker to come to a community event, and then for us as staff to work with you and identify who might be available to attend that event. So we'll put some thought into that. And
Would it be appropriate for board members to send staff, ideas of either forums that they think might be appropriate for PDAB staff to reach out to, as well as to provide potential questions that they might think would be appropriate if we redo the way we solicit feedback on affordability and accessibility? Like, are those things that would be good ideas for board members to start circulating to staff, just so you have it as part of the general toolbox of things to put together as these new materials are being developed?
oh yeah, that would definitely, but both of those things would be helpful if, you all have different personal and professional networks. So if you know about organizations or events that we should have on our contact list, please just send them to the main PDAB mailbox. So that's the pdab@dcbs.oregon.gov. And many of them Melissa probably already has on our email contacts list, because she's developed an extensive list there. But I'm sure there's many that we don't as well. So we will certainly keep adding those contacts, and then start taking your suggestions kind of on what we might want that standing feedback form to look like. And we can, again, iterate and improve on that. So yeah, we'll come back to you with operational updates on these ideas over the next couple of board meetings, and welcome specific suggestions from any of the board members about questions to ask, people to ask those questions to, as we move forward.
Thank you, Michelle, or thank you, Sarah, but Michelle, your hand is raised. You have the floor.
Apologies for the last minute thought. Could we also consider engaging with aging and disability and individuals who help folks enroll in marketplace plans and other things who may be looking to switch plans due to affordability challenges?
That's a really good suggestion, Michelle.
Yeah, that is a good suggestion. They have access to a wide range of folks, so that's a good thing to follow up on.
All right, well, if we have completed our discussion related to the community outreach forums and the kind of plan in the past and possibly the plan in the future, I would like to call on PDAB staff to help lead us through a discussion related to the annual report planning, as well as just having initial broad-based discussions on potential policy concepts for staff to further research based on board member interests. So I believe that staff member might be Courtney. So if it is Courtney, welcome, and you have the floor.
Actually, I think I'll turn it to Sarah to go over the annual outline,
Okay,
and then I will cover the policy recommendation information.
great. Well, welcome, Sarah. You have the floor.
Okay. My screen sharing just stopped. Come on. Try this again. Is that showing up this time?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Just a couple of quick slides that are also included in the packet, but I will share them on the screen so that we can focus the discussion. Again, planning ahead, putting on board members' radar to start thinking about our annual report. And one reason we wanted to start having that conversation with you today about what this year's report should look like is, as a reminder, some of the technical changes to the statute are taking effect for this year's report cycle. So just a reminder, our authorizing statutes require an annual report to the Healthcare Cost Growth Target Committee and technically the health committees of the Oregon legislature, that is due before the end of the year. The statute also lays out 4 key content areas to include in the annual report. That includes both some background information on the prescription drug market in Oregon, and then specific updates about the work the board has done. Within this outline, there is a lot of flexibility for how the board wants to present that information. So the key required areas, data elements, chapters are the 4 things listed on this slide, including some price trend analysis of drugs, what drugs we're doing affordability reviews on, information about the generic drug market, and then optionally recommendations for legislative changes. We often shorthand that as policy recommendations. So in prior years, you had a separate generic drug report as a standalone report, the annual report. And then, of course, last year, given the timeline changes, we also had kind of a third standalone report that we actually issued in March of this year for summarizing the drug review affordability findings and results. For 2026, all of that is going to be in a single report. And thinking about what that would look like, here's my proposed format for how we present that information. It is technically one report. There's no reason we need to write it in one single document. And as a practical matter, just for considerations of staff's work on writing and formatting and reviewing the documents, I would like to propose that we kind of break it into two parts, two sections. One of which is the pieces that are really the data analysis. So that is the price trends about drug prices and the report on the generic drug market. Those two things, those two elements are really data analysis. And then part two would really be the things that are kind of directly reporting on the work of the board and where the board members have been most heavily engaged, which of course is the drug affordability reviews and then the policy recommendations. So it would be in two parts. It would still be one report, and we would finish it all before December 31st, and of course, transmit it to all of the legislative contacts. So I'm looking for board member feedback on if that presentation, that format makes sense, and any other questions or suggestions that we should be thinking about for preparing for the annual report, so staff can start working on the sections of this where we need to do more writing and data analysis. So I see several hands raised for feedback, starting with Chair Bailey.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. So if I'm reading this clearly, I think you're looking for feedback on essentially whether we could go through part one earlier and essentially agree on the language, give our feedback related to part one, so that part one is kind of ready and waiting in the wings, so that when it's time to do part two, which will be a more compressed timeline, we've already agreed to the pieces of part one. So then we're just kind of agreeing and discussing the pieces of part two. Then you put it together, and then we're able to meet our timeline to report back to the legislature. That's what you're proposing? Okay.
Both for timeline and for kind of format layout.
Well, format, layout, and just bandwidth.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. Thank you for that. I don't know who is next, Mr. Murray.
I like the idea, the proposed format, and I would like to express appreciation for the early bringing up of policy recommendations, because I've long been an advocate of this board. You know, I'm not a fan of upper payment limits to this point, because I live it every day. I see it. But I do like the idea of this board making recommendations to the legislature. We are an informed group. We know about what's going on, generally speaking, in the drug market and in our particular areas. And so thank you for this early discussion. I do like the fact that part two, affordability reviews and policy recommendations, if they're given equal weight, that's fantastic, because that's the pitch that I made to Rep. Noses, that if he would consider policy recommendations from the PDAB and expand our ability. You know, I don't mean to get into those specific policy recommendations just yet, but one of them was to expand the PDAB to offer suggestions of ways that we could increase affordability and access. So thank you for that, and I'm in support of what you're proposing here.
Vice Chair Dr. Hartung.
I have a comment and question. Could we flip back one slide to the yeah. So for the integrated generic drug market report, are those sub bullets, are those all like statutorily required? Like we need to have all those components in the generic drug component of our annual report?
Yes, those are
Okay,
subsections
Okay.
called out in the statutory text.
okay, so we didn't really get out of anything, we just put it in a different place. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely, it does not have to be as long of a report as last year. As long as we touch on all of those topics, there's flexibility in kind of how long we make it.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. I guess I'm trying to think like strategically about like what's the best rather than kind of reiterating, 90% of prescription drugs filled are generic drugs, they're affordable, blah blah. Is there anything like truly useful we can kind of unearth out of under that rubric? But I don't know the answer to that right now, but the other was more of a comment on point one, and then we got into this last year, and it was kind of like the way we did it in terms of price trends for drugs identified in the DPT. There were some data issues in terms of we were using DPT data to try to track pricing issues, and because of inconsistency from year to year and how DPT is collecting the data, it created these idiosyncrasies and anomalies that were hard to explain and difficult. So I would say as a one board member, I would suggest that we do the price trending data, but we use the data, the drugs that are identified in the DPT data, but then use APAC data to have a consistent point to point trend of the pricing information. So we don't have these issues about, one look at the data shows that it's going down, the other look at the data shows that it's going up. So we don't know what is true. So that would be my overriding suggestion for point number one, as you start to tackle that particular analysis.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dan, and definitely recognize some of the challenges last year. Again, this is another area where starting earlier gives us more opportunities to thoughtfully work through those data issues and identify the best data sources. So I think that's leaning more heavily on APAC for overall expenditures is a really a good idea, and definitely something we can look into implementing. Again, we have to manage our staff time, but that's why we want to start now, so we have time to do it.
A couple of thoughts I had related to this. I think so, recognizing what we have to provide on generics, right? So thank you, Vice Chair Dr. Hartung, for that question. I do think I feel like last year we did provide some kind of updates on what was going on in the biosimilar market too, because I think there's a trend toward net. I think some of what's going on in the biosims and the generic market is still important and meaningful. Same with like PBM owned generic companies and things. I think we did a little bit of shining a light on that and what the AWPs of some of those drugs look like versus other company owned generics. So I think there's still a lot going on in the generic space that impacts access and affordability. But the one question I did want to ask was related to, I mean, clearly, logistically speaking, breaking it up like that is certainly something that I would be able to support. I do want to ask, though, if we are putting our legislative suggestions in the second part of our document, which would lead me to believe that's going to obviously be at the very end. I think that I did want to ask you, Sarah, because you just have the pulse on the timeline with the legislature. What I want to be mindful of is making sure that we don't miss any opportunity for placeholder bills, because obviously Senator Patterson said that she would advance the two concepts that we agreed to as a board from our last year's report. And so very grateful for her for being willing to do that. But I want to make sure that if we make the policy recommendations the second half of our report, that like I'm a little bit inclined to want to vote on that earlier as opposed to later, so that even if our report's not fully out, if we have voted on it as a board, maybe we can better empower the legislature with concepts that we've agreed to as a board. Because obviously what John talked about with, Representative Noes might not be the will of the entire board, right? So I would a little bit be inclined to see if we could earlier on vote on some of the policy recommendations so that we could just be more, we don't lose a year with legislators. Am I thinking about this wrong, or is that's something we might want? But Mr. Murray, your hand is raised, so you have the floor.
Yeah, I'm concerned about this being a purely academic action, and I'm not one to have a lot of time to do things that don't have a meaningful application once they're done. And so I did ask about that in some meetings, and I was happy to hear that you met with Senator Patterson and Representative Noes specifically on.
We haven't met with Representative Noes yet, but it is on the books. So
Okay, with Senator Patterson then on taking these recommendations to heart and suggesting them. So I'm really happy to hear that. I wish that it will continue. So I'm in favor of, if there's an earlier application of this, so we don't postpone it beyond the current year. I know that they're planning for the 2027 legislative session now. We've got to get these things in front of them if we're serious about doing any of these things. I mean, the pace that public moves versus what I have to do in the private sector just to stay alive just shocks me. It's just mind-boggling to me sometimes. So anyway, I'm just saying I would love to have actionable recommendations and then a path forward and someone to help us carry the water. If we feel it's important as a PDAB, and we're just to get this in front of the legislator so that they see it in a more serious light, more than just a report with an executive summary, I think is a great idea.
thank you, Mr. Murray. And that's exactly where I was getting at. Again, very grateful for Senator Patterson and her willingness on that. And to your point, just want to make sure that taxpayer money is moving in the right direction with our actionable, with our concepts that we provide being something that's timely to the legislature to make, more timely decisions. And again, so I don't know what month that would have to be voted on. I suspect it's relatively soon, so I'm not trying to derail us, but just wanted to bring some visibility to that part. Perhaps it's our next meeting. Maybe there's
So-
not time for that deep dive for our next meeting.
Well, and I think this is a great transition to the second half of this discussion. Excuse me, frog in my throat. Where Courtney's going to lead us in a conversation about policy concepts. And so kind of as a practical matter, I don't think we can get the fully formatted final version of the report done until December. But if the board has approved sections of the content, there's nothing presenting or preventing the board from sort of posting the pre-formatted versions of those content sections as soon as they're approved. So, from the idea of having something available for you, Chair Bailey, and for other board members to talk about with legislators, talk about with other stakeholders, we can certainly work on that. The challenge, and I think the challenge on some of these policy concepts is going to be that it will take some amount of time, both for the board to discuss the policy concepts and then for staff to research and develop the policy concepts that the board is interested in prioritizing. That is certainly why we wanted to bring this conversation to the June meeting to start getting your feedback on where what concepts you want to prioritize and where you would like staff to go do additional research about, you know, pros and cons and operational considerations and what's been done in other states in this area. All of that background information that makes for a stronger policy proposal. It does take us some time to do that. So that's, you know, that's going to be one of the just inherent limits on how quickly we can move. But we're starting the conversation today. So definitely much we're starting it earlier this year, and we can enable the board to move more quickly than last year. My general understanding just about the way legislative processes work, and please don't quote me because certainly not an expert here, is that the legislators have a deadline sometime possibly in early September to present concepts to legislative council to be drafted into bills to be available at the beginning of the session. Now they can have also introduce placeholders and introduce additional legislative language through amendments later on throughout the session. But I think they have an initial deadline sometime in September for the 2027 session. I
Well,
guess
thank you.
another deadline to keep in mind is, of course, when 2027 session actually starts would probably be another important deadline to keep in mind.
Thank you for that context. Ms. Hoagland, your hand is raised. You have the floor.
A couple of things. I know that the next session is going to be stressful with the budget concerns. I speak regularly with local legislators about healthcare related issues, not the PDAB specifically. But one thing that comes to my mind is the fact that we can also ask our participants who are especially advocacy folks to, be communicating with their legislators about the importance of, prescription affordability. And so that it gets on the radar screen of a number of folks. It's great that you guys are having the conversations with some leaders. But also I think it's helpful to have, the various folks that provide testimony also go out to and say, this really matters to us, and voice their interest to their legislators.
That's a great idea. Thank you very much, Ms. Hoagland. And I did want to just qualify for the record that PDAB is not funded by taxpayer dollars. I know better, and I know that our revenue sources come from our combined work with DPT and the payment from manufacturers. So I just wanted to make sure to say that just for the record. But I did want to just highlight, like, listening to the time, that obviously it might take to research some of the policy recommendations. I just guess personally, I'm always mindful when we're talking to legislators about being very clear of like what are things that are important to Shelley, just specifically as an Oregonian, but what we voted on and have like a consensus on, or at least the majority on. Majority is the more appropriate word, from the PDAB. So I'm always very mindful of that. And so at least when I heard Senator Patterson, when we had our reconnect or connect, was that even if, as long as we didn't have to have detailed policy language and things, but as long as we had a majority from the board of something that was the will of the board, that their policy team would also be able to help support refining things, so that maybe we don't have to wait till something's completely refined, but that we could still get it in front by that September deadline, as long as that's the will of the board.
I mean, I think one of the challenges that I want to be cognizant of for staff is I think that background information that Courtney and our team does may also be important for some board members in, making your decisions on these recommendations. And we want to make sure that we are able to staff you as best possible as far as providing that research and background information for your decision making, as well as to present to the legislators. So just recognizing the time challenges inherent in that.
I think Mr. Murray, I saw your hand first. Mr. Murray, you have the floor.
Yeah, I'm to my way of thinking, this is great to be talking about it early. There are certain policy recommendations which, I would have an immediate impact in Oregon, like delinking PBM profits from drug cost. Is that something that we could propose? Sure, we could. And would it have probably a positive impact on affordability? Yeah, probably so. Could it be shot down in committee in about 10 minutes? Yeah, it sure could. And so when we have our policy recommendation development and our discussion, I'm going to focus on things that first aren't going to cost a fortune because the legislators are not going to be looking to fund those, honestly. But information and transparency, I'm going to continue to advocate that if we have good information, not information that in 10 minutes of a committee spokesperson from a certain area of our drug delivery system to confuse the legislators on that panel, great. I would love to have objectivity and transparency and information from sources that are irrefutable. And so I'm going to, when we talk about specific policy recommendations, I'm going to be focusing on them. Will it have as an immediate impact on the drug supply chain or patient access and affordability? No, not as immediate as I would like. And maybe we can throw some in, but I really would like, I'm playing for the long game. Our business in rural Oregon has been in business for 67 years in towns of 5,000, 1,200, and 750. You don't get to stay in business that long in these towns by not taking care of people in the long run. So I'm aiming for that. I'm hoping for that. I don't want another year to slip by where we don't make legislative recommendations that have some use, that can't just be shot down by a PBM representative in a committee hearing. I'll just be blunt, in about 10 minutes, because that's what happens. So anyway, that's my take. Sorry about that. I'm too blunt.
No, thank you, Mr. Murray. Vice Chair Dr. Hartung, your hand is raised and you have the floor.
Yeah, so I hear the concerns and I'll just express my opinion here. In terms of like getting stuff in front of legislators sooner rather than later. I mean, engaging in this process, I feel like should be a deliberative process. And I think going through, there's, the subsequent slides have a slew of different concepts, new ideas, old ideas that we've already voted on, have already reached majority consensus on. I feel like we can, at the very least, we could repackage everything we've already agreed that we think we should advance and send that, at the earliest possible date. Just a reminder, we've already said we should do all these things, but I'm definitely in favor of a more deliberative process where we identify a few discrete areas that we then have staff kind of do due diligence on and bringing us all up to speed on kind of what the state of the art is on these different policies. And so we're not kind of just over expansive and overreaching in kind of what we're thinking about. So I guess I'd lean more towards being more deliberative in kind of in what we're doing for this year. And then perhaps just, again, leaning on what we did in prior years and saying, just a reminder, we think that these things are good ideas. We still think that they're good ideas. you know, for people who are thinking early about the 2027.
I think that's a very good reminder, Vice Chair Dr. Hartung, that also just reminding them of what we suggested previously. I know you're right. I think obviously what we'll talk about, I think, is just a culmination of things that we've talked about over multiple years. So it wasn't like one board member just dumped a bunch of new stuff, which is often me. But like this was old things, that just got documented in one place. I know, at least from my perspective, it would seem that one way to help support the deliberative process is also potentially focusing on things that have been implemented in other states as opposed to just some new random idea. Like clearly, I know in the past I've brought forward things that were associated with other parts of the supply chain, like brokers and things that maybe there's just not as much outcomes data from states that have done it. But on things where there are states that have implemented, that might be able to assist us when it's concepts that other states have deployed. But Mr. Lehman, I see that your hand is raised, so you have the floor.
I have one comment sort of consistent with the conversation that's going on, and then a question about the proposed format. So first, I felt like we as a board requested to start talking about these policy recommendations earlier in the year to do just what Sarah was talking about, have this deliberate conversation over multiple meetings and allow the staff to provide, the more information. So I would not support us now trying to rush over the next couple of months to do what we've essentially been doing at the end of the year so that we could get it done in time, from this new September timeline that we have talked about. So I feel like very supportive of the plan that Sarah and Courtney's have, which is let us as a board identify the things from this list or add other things, and then have the team do due diligence and provide information to us going forward so we can come up with a consensus about what the recommendations are. So that's my stance on that. And then the second piece is, it seems to me over the last year or so, the policy recommendations have really become a core function that we're thinking about and where the most impact potentially is going to be. So just structurally in the report, if we have the generic report and it's 40 or 50 pages, and then we have the affordability reviews and it's 30 or 40, a long piece, and then it gets to the very end and the policy recommendations are there. I mean, should we start with an introduction and orient the people reading the report to what is enclosed in the report and say, hey, based on all of our research and knowledge, here are the policy recommendations we have, and sort of start the report with that so that it's not essentially buried, and maybe people will find the policy recommendations anyway. But if you're, I don't know, not aware that that's at the core of what's in this, it may just get lost. I don't know. Does the group have thoughts on that?
Mr. Lehman, I don't disagree with any of that. And I would say, just to make sure I provide clarity for my own comments, I guess I was thinking that if we got things to the legislature within that September timeframe, that gives us essentially 3.5 meetings. So it was not my intention to suggest rushing. It was just that could we then, if September is kind of the one, like agree that we would at least by September be able to have voted on that so that we could just, even if our report's not completed, get that piece just visible to legislators that might want to be able to include that information, which could very much include all of our previous recommendations, right? But I want to make sure I wasn't referencing doing it anytime sooner than that September timeline. But I agree with you that if something like that is a core concept or a core piece of what board members feel strongly about and think has the most outcome to Oregonians, increasing the visibility higher up in the document makes a lot of sense to me. But Mr. Murray, your hand is raised. You have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Lehman, I do agree with changing the format. I like your thoughts on that. The policy recommendations I think are important and I think should be higher priority. Yeah.
And if I can just jump in and say the material does not need to be in the order that it is listed on this slide. That was just simply listing the order it's mentioned in statute for convenience, but there's no reason the sections have to be in that order in the version that we publish.
Yeah, so jumping in real quick, I agree that the order of operation would definitely suit better with having those recommendations probably in part one. So just flipping part one and part two with policy recommendations at the top with the affordability review in that section, and then the supporting information that's data trending over the year in part two. But as Sarah said, we just pulled this from kind of the statute setup, but after hearing the conversation, I do believe that it's way more relevant to get the most essential information at first, which is the review, recommendations, and then the review.
So I guess I'm left with a question then. The public meeting that I attended had Representative McIntyre from the Behavioral Health and Healthcare Committee in attendance. And while we didn't have a lot of public, we did have discussion during that meeting. I voiced the need for manufacturer cost data security, but the access to it to shine a truer light on drug costs going through the system and where it's going awry. My estimation, please correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, that she was willing to entertain information from us or a request from us, or at least interested in hearing from the PDAB. What are we thinking of doing with that recommendation? So when we say we're going to put them off till December, well, then Representative McIntyre has no way to act on that. Even if she wanted to, would she be able to introduce a bill then? Please, somebody help me with that.
We're not intending to put things off until December for sure. That those concepts are one of the many things on the list that Courtney will discuss next. And that's one area where, we're looking for your feedback as board members of which of those concepts that have been included in past board discussions and past conversations are the small number that you want us to prioritize for additional research, review, and development for this year. So if that's one of the concepts that you want to prioritize for this year, John, this is the time to let us know so we can start developing that from a high-level concept to a more concrete proposal about what that would actually look like.
Okay, well, it would seem to me that it's fairly straightforward versus, delinking PBM profits and the effects that it would have rippling through the drug delivery system. This request would be fairly easy to address, in my opinion, I think, but maybe not. But I just don't want to leave a representative hanging who's expressed an interest in helping the PDAB with something that the board might. Now, granted, maybe I spoke out of turn, but I would like to see this information, and it hasn't been voted on the board. But if we wait till December, I just think it's a wasted opportunity.
All of these concepts, or at least most of them, I think the few things that have been introduced in previous legislation probably have had more development, but many of these concepts need additional work to specify, and one of the things that the board can do to help your recommendations have more weight with legislatures is provide that background information. What are the specific changes or exceptions that we would need to Oregon public meeting law to make it easier to review confidential and trade secret information? Are there any other examples of other state entities that have exceptions that we could use as a model. That kind of background information in a well-written policy memo, like Courtney prepared for the March drug review report, helps give your recommendations more weight with legislatures and helps give stakeholders more tools if there are stakeholders who are interested in supporting or amplifying PDAB recommendations. That background information is really important for them as well to be able to speak strongly to the benefits and the pros and the cons of these recommendations. So that's, again, that I think we're saying the same thing, but that's why we want to start the process now. And Michelle.
Just to tag on to what Sarah just said, something that I've been thinking about as we put forward recommendations or even during our deliberations is we might want to consider using an impact and effort matrix, particularly during some severe budget constraints for the state and knowing that it is an election year.
Yeah, Michelle, that's kind of where what the risk, what the benefit is. So I do incorporate as much as those into it as I can, but yeah, it's,
Great
I
idea.
think it's, oh, what's that, Dan?
Oh, yes, that was a great idea, Michelle.
Yeah, it definitely helps. I think this is a great conversation, and when we're ready, we can dive into actually the policy recommendations. I did want to just state that, John, I totally hear what you're saying, that the sooner we can get some of this information before legislators, the better it will be for many things for the board. Also pointing out that if the board does come to a consensus before December, there's nothing preventing the board from submitting the recommendation component earlier than the rest of the report. The statutory requirement is to have everything submitted by the end of the year, but that doesn't mean we have to wait until the end of the year. So as the discussions continue, we start really knowing what direction we want to go with the policy selection, policy memos, and all that other stuff. We can absolutely do a submission earlier for those policy recommendations and then just follow suit with the rest of the documentation towards the end of the year. Yeah, Chair Bailey, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Courtney. And again, I really do like Chairwoman Coder's idea of incorporating that matrix, which it sounds like, Courtney, you already had in your line of sight. While it wouldn't apply to a lot of the potential recommendations that we have, I mean, there's a couple comments I would make. Anything we've already advanced that hasn't come into fruition per Vice Chair Dr. Kennedy's suggestion, I think I would just like to say that I think we should advance what we already advanced, just like as a reminder, possibly. But then I guess I would also add that in our 2024 report on upper payment limits, we did also include some suggestions that are on the document that we'll be going through. And some of those suggestions, while they're not policy memos, do have all the citations for the states that are already doing it. Now, the effort and outcome matrix, that would have to still be taken into consideration. But a lot of the things that are on within this our purview of discussion today do have full citations in our 2024 prescription drug affordability report. And that's just a reminder to help make things more efficient in policy memos.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification, Chair Bailey. I guess since we are kind of getting more into the policy topic, do you want to just transition over to that so I can share screen?
Yeah, I'll go ahead, I guess, and for the record, read my own speaking notes to make sure that I transition to this appropriately. So I guess we are now, I would like to call on Courtney Whitlock to help facilitate the board discussion related to policy concepts and staff research related to those policy concepts. So Courtney, you have the floor. We naturally got there anyways, but now we're here formally.
Perfect. Thanks, Chair Bailey and board. So again, I submitted a documentation of slides for all the policies that have been discussed, submitted to legislators, or have been in some form brought up during board meetings. I was able to put them into kind of 6 different policy domains, focusing on data collection and transparency, PBM reform, patient affordability and insurance design, Medicaid, pharmacy delivery system, drug manufacturer, and market oversight, and then the PDAB governance and authority. So again, all of these recommendations have come from board members in some capacity, whether it's been voted on already, discussed in some concept, or previously mentioned. So kind of jumping into the data collection and transparency, we did see that patient assistant program reporting was already picked up by legislators under Senate Bill 1528. It was introduced, but it was not enacted. So there is some interest with legislators for this kind of information. Again, I can go back and do research about what made the bill drop or not be voted into, and then kind of piece in how to shore up any of those concerns that didn't allow for the enactment. Copay maximizer reporting, the alternative funding program reporting, abandoned prescription tracking, plan design transparency, and even the ERISA reporting to APAC, all concepts that were discussed within the last few months. Now, some of these, especially like the ERISA reporting, that's a federal thing. So it might be a little overreaching, but I did want to just capture it in case, there was some way to get around it. But just, that might be my one that would be very, very challenging to create a meaningful policy memo on. However, plan design transparency, we were hearing a lot from patients that plan designs, the plan that they are on, the formulary placement due to the plan design is starting to show an impact for patient out-of-pocket costs. And also, as we already discussed today, the abandonment of prescription drugs, and what the tracking mechanism of that would be. So, kind of leaning into like a data collection and transparency, again, knowing that this is kind of a newer concept, but are there any other interests? Just in the sense where this is a good time to let me know, because after today, when we go through all these, I'm sending the board members a survey form with all these concepts on, and you will, in a Likert scale, tell me if you're really interested in having a memo on it this time, if it's not so much. And then next month I will come back and I will let you know what ones had the largest markers, which ones will just probably fall off, and then that will help narrow it down. It would be my intention, if you want meaningful high-level policy memos, probably no more than 4. But if you want policy minis, which are just kind of high research, really high level, I could probably do up to 6, maybe no more than 7. If there's a whole bunch of concepts that we're just not sure about, but it also would depend on what the research components of those would be. I would know better once I get the survey information back. But before I continue, Dr. Hartang, I see your hand up.
Just a quick question, and maybe a more deep comment. The patient assistance program reporting, was that something that we recommended?
Yeah, I think it was back in.
Okay.
Yeah, at some point, like towards the beginning of the development of PDAB.
Okay. Yeah. So I just wanted to make sure that was something that we at least advanced as a recommendation and was moved on at some point. And I'm wondering about just process-wise for today's meeting, if just to move the ball forward quicker, just realizing that there's like people want these things quicker rather than a delay. And I wonder, is it possible to like get some sort of consensus about which one of these things we can have, put on our list of memoable for you and your staff today versus waiting another month and then blah blah blah. So just a thought.
Yeah, let's see, let's run through the domains and then maybe wrap back around if we have enough time to see if there's any like high level important ones that everybody kind of agrees that needs, I can start showing it. But I do think it would be meaningful to still send out the survey so that everybody has an opportunity to voice their options. Yeah, Lori, I see your hand up.
So I wanted to speak to the abandoned prescription tracking, which I talked about a little bit earlier in the meeting, and the idea that if we, I think with equity, it would provide some very valuable information. I also think that it could increase quality of patient care if that information gets back to providers. What's going on with patients at the pharmacy. I do realize that there could be a cost to it because it may require some computer system development. But anyway, I think I just wanted to promote that.
Thanks, Lori. Chair Bailey, I see your hand up. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. Just a process question. So A, thank you for kind of doing this drill down of all of these for us here today. I do think, to someone else's point, having us vote, because some board members express themselves in communication differently, having us still vote, I think will be helpful, like later after the meeting. But then I did want to ask, is the period to add anything new going to be kind of at the end of your discussion? Would that be most appropriate?
Unless you have one for the domain that it's in, it probably be
Okay.
better served within the domain that it's
I just
we're talking
wanted
about.
to. Yeah, then okay.
Okay.
Well, I'll change my
And if-
comment based on that.
And
Okay,
if there's
cool.
not really a domain, then whenever you feel it's applicable to.
Then I will let Mr. Murray go, and then I'll raise my hand again.
Okay.
Mr. Murray, you have the floor.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo support for the idea that if, say, we have one suggestion for the legislative policy at the end of this discussion today, that we might be able to move forward on that one with policy with some detail work done by staff, if possible. Just a thought. I appreciated the thought, though.
All right, sounds good. Chair Bailey, do you want to take your opportunity, or do you want?
No, the Vice Chair Dr. Hartung can go, and then I will add one to this data collection and transparency. So Vice Chair Dr. Hartung, you have the floor.
And I also want to just process clarification that we we're talking about just directing staff to create provide more information about these things, but I feel like we shouldn't preempt the fact that at the end of this, if there is a specific recommendation when we get to the part of our meeting where we vote on recommendations, and if a board member wants to advance a recommendation that a policy memo hasn't been developed because maybe they forgot or whatever, and then they can articulate it well enough and bring everyone up to speed in the meeting at the time. I feel like, because I don't want to get into this situation where we're like automatically excluding some things people haven't thought of just because we haven't developed a memo on from being at least considered at the end of this process. So, because so we're just kind of de-shackling the generation of information to support us versus advancing recommendations that can be voted at the end. So
Yeah, and just we're not voting on anything. If there is one for me to start kind of looking at research and I can bring it back next month, I'm happy to do that. But the intention today, and we didn't set up the agenda to do voting. If we do vote, and we do need to indicate it in our agenda. So, and again, this is why I'm going to be sending out the survey information, and then we'll have probably just one more conversation about these, the highest level reported ones for next month. But at least if I have an idea of what board members are most interested in, that helps me start the research a little bit earlier. Yes, Chris.
I totally get that, but I also know how we operate here, and we're going to start down these paths and get hyper focused on these things. And so I just want to leave the door open that at the end of this, people can just recommend something and vote on it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, Dan, I agree with you 100%. Like I think any of us would probably, if it's something we support, do that.
Thanks, Chris.
Michelle?
Question for those board members with significantly more tenure than I have and specific to this domain. Does this capture all of the conversations that have been had around the limitations of the data? Are there things that we can put forward that would improve the data that we have to evaluate drugs for affordability reviews?
I mean, I'm just gonna jump in here as a non-data person, Michelle. I think some of it is also the timeline and how what we get back from the carriers has to be scrubbed pretty. There's a lot of effort involved because we don't get, since my understanding is we don't always get consistency back in the reporting. So some of our limitations are, even if we propose changing the law, it might not change the operational challenges with getting some of the information. I'm not saying that's a good answer, but that is my understanding on some of it. And then, of course, some of the things are other laws prohibit some of the use cases we might otherwise be looking for access to data on. But that's just me. But lots of hands went up, so it looks like Sarah, you have the floor.
So I guess as a follow-up to that, Michelle, I think data improvements often take a while, but they can be a very valuable long-term investment in our policy and our data infrastructure that we have in the state. So if there are either specific areas of our existing data that have limitations that you've identified, or specific other data questions, like, for example, we've discussed several times, wish we knew more about prescriptions that are abandoned. Those would be areas to identify. I think this is the concepts that Courtney and I had heard articulated, but if you have another one in the data space, please raise it, because that's again long-term, but can be very helpful over time.
Thank you, Sarah. I don't know whose hand was up. Vice Chair Dr. Hartung, you have the floor.
That's a great point, Michelle, and and I don't know how much legislatively we're wedded to, we're always lamenting the fact that our data are 2 years old, in addition to the fact that it's not net pricing. And so, and I don't know how much we're legislatively, statutorily wedded to APAC data, which is, good and available, and it's states collecting it, it's available. But, if resources were not an issue, there are better data sources for prescription drugs out there that you could purchase that are immediately they're very recent, up to like the last month. And so if the board wants to really improve the accuracy and the timeliness of data, there are things we can recommend that we have access to do that. There's IQVIA is a proprietary company that makes really good data, or like collects really good data, really accurate data. It's also very expensive. So
Yeah, and Judd, just real quick, I wanted to address what Dr. Hartung was saying, and that would not be a legislative concept, because the board does have the jurisdiction. It is in the statute to use the DPT data and access into the APAC data. But if you wanted to look at IQVIA, that's basically down to the budget within what the board has. And we'd have to see how that would, impact things, but that's more of a board decision versus a legislative concept. But thank you, John, for waiting. Your hand's getting very tired.
No, that's fine. I appreciated Michelle's comment, and because if there's something that we need to do our job better to assess affordability and access, I would like to hear it, but I would turn the question a little bit back on staff. Is there something that you need that we should be advocating for as board members? For example, the cost figures from the manufacturers. If that's something that we as a board should be voting on or thinking about or considering or advocating for once recommended, I want to know that. I need to know that. And so any other recommendations you have, I'd like to hear it. Please.
Chair Bailey, did you want to go before I?
Yeah, well, why don't you respond to Mr. Murray's comment? And then I had 2 additions I just wanted to make to this list. So go ahead, Courtney, you have the floor.
Yeah, Jen, just because you did ask staff directly what we would need, and I would say one of the biggest gaps that we have is CCO data. Because CCO data is governed over at OHA, we have no insight to how CCOs pay anything. So utilizing something like a data call to the CCOs would be beneficial, because then we could be able to have insight into something like that. But I think as far as we have a pretty good insight to commercial, really missing a lot of stuff on Medicaid and Medicare.
So Courtney, that response was very helpful. Oh, Sarah, go ahead, and then I will add my recommendations. Sarah, you have the floor.
I would qualify Courtney's statement in one element, which is we have pretty good insight in a segment of the commercial market. It's important to keep in mind that most of the employer-sponsored insurance provided by larger employers that is self-insured and subject to ERISA preemption, we often do not get data on those members or those plans. So we get the fully insured slice of the commercial market. We generally don't get the self-insured slice of the commercial market because, again, ERISA preemption. And another group, the PEB plans and OEB plans, kind of fall into a odd gray area where we don't necessarily get them. One of the challenges there, speaking of budget, is it's budgetary cost for the PEB and OEB systems to provide information to us. So that can be a barrier to increasing reporting there.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I appreciate that clarification.
Thank you for that. So Courtney, I would like to make a few policy recommendations that are related to data collection and transparency. So you'll have to help wordsmith some of this, but based on some of our discussions about an hour ago, one of the policy recommendations that I would want to make would be for commercial claims that all data comes directly to PDAB and not through DCBS, so that per Sarah's comment about the DFR director inquiry, so that PDAB's not subject to that, so that we would be able to look at claims more at a plan specific level. So that would be one policy recommendation I would want to make based on what I heard today. Another policy recommendation related to data collection and transparency is that I believe the 2025 law, House Bill 3409, did establish at least the framework for a 340B clearinghouse. I believe that's housed under OHA and under the Oregon Pharmacy Services Program. So I would like, if once there's claim data, again, I'm not asking for net 340B price, that wasn't my intention with this. But if there's claims data available, either at the carrier level, like at the drug level, like I think that if there's now laws that make that data available, I believe that would help PDAB make more meaningful policy recommendations and more meaningful drug affordability reviews. So I guess that's a data collection and transparency request. And then I think that links to what I believe I just heard from Courtney and possibly Sarah talking about the CCO data gap, or from Courtney, the CCO data gap. Then I would like to make a formal recommendation that we discuss making a recommendation about a data call from CCOs. And then I would say the same thing about PEB and OEB. I know I hear the limitations related to it, but that's still an important piece that we do not have visibility on. So I recognize those were 4 separate things. It's not my intention to quadruple the work of staff, but based on this rich discussion today, I think that's important. I also did want to put a pin in the discussion leading that Vice Chair Dr. Hartung referenced about data sources, and he referenced IQVIA and others. There was a period of time when I'm aware we were discussing issuing an RFP for vendor partners like that. Our use case might be different based on where we're at right now with affordability reviews and what legally we're able to do and not do. But that might be something that later we would want to discuss, because I think Vice Chair Dr. Hartung brought up a very good point. Again, that is not a policy recommendation, that's an operational concept that's related to budget. But I wanted to just make sure to reference it for the record so that we do not lose sight of those discussions that had occurred previously.
Yes, all of that is great. Thank you, Chair Bailey. I will add those in.
I know that was a lot. Thankfully, the meeting's recorded.
Yeah, I got it. I documented it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I will go ahead and incorporate those in, and then if we, and send them out to the board members for vote. For this section, any other comments, feedback? Otherwise, I'm going to move on. All right, so the next section, we've had quite a bit of recommendations around this already. This is for PBM reform and market transparency. As you see, the legislative activity has already been under 2 House bills. 4149 was enacted in 2024, and then House Bill 3213, which went through in 2025, was introduced but not enacted. And then following the PDAB recommendations that have already been submitted to legislators in a form of a report, which again is that eliminated spread pricing, delinking PBM conventions with the drug prices, objective reimbursement benchmarks, so looking at NADAC and AAAC, any willing provider requirements, and then the below cost reimbursement protections. In some capacity, those are already been voted recommendations to legislators. The vertical integration review and PBM conduct and rebate dynamics were just discussions or prior recommendations for discussion in previous meetings, but did not have any traction for legislative concept to go into a report. Any discussions around these topics or any additional recommendations that would fall into the PBM reform or market transparency? And Chair Bailey, see your hand.
Courtney, there's nothing new, but I would say the vertical integration, I would just lean into the fact that since we last discussed that, there's federal bills out related to that, which again is different than our purview. But then there's also states that advanced it. I think Tennessee is one of the new ones that has, like, I could be wrong on the state, but I think it's Tennessee. So there has been advancements on some of that weren't, that hadn't been advanced when we previously had discussion. So that's just additional context and color for my peers no direct request related to that. But I think, Mr. Murray, you had your hand raised first, I think, so you have the floor.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on the objective reimbursement benchmarks. Through work on House Bill 3212, when it was going on, a legislative council was requested, or an opinion about using something like that, NADAC in particular. And they were given the opinion that House Bill 3212 as written violates the non-delegation doctrine of the Oregon Constitution. And I just wanted to say that I think there's going to have to be some challenges to things like that. I mean, just as a pharmacist standpoint, from my standpoint, to have my reimbursement based on costs that are determined by the person paying me, and they differ between my 3 pharmacies on which list is being used to pay me off of, I have a problem with. And so I'm just commenting that there's things that I really appreciate being recommended in the past by PDAB, but I think other people are going to have to step up and maybe even have a lawsuit if it's going to challenge these legal opinions. I think that's probably what's going to happen. I would bet objectivity would be great, as would transparency and factual information, all the things that we lack sometimes in PDAB all the time.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Mr. Kennedy, your hand is raised. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Bailey. I just wanted to comment on the fact that it was Tennessee that just passed the new law, and it requires that PBMs cannot own community pharmacies, in which I believe the PBM in question, CVS Caremark, is planning to file suit against the state of Tennessee for that law. So more to come on that.
Mr. Kennedy, thank you for that context. Glad my recollection was accurate. I believe there's actually some other, I think North or South Dakota, I think had a similar law like that a few years ago. Courtney, the only thing I would want to share for clarification is on line item number 4, objective reimbursement NADAC or benchmarks. I hear what Mr. Murray said, and believe those discussions will advance how they will, but I would like to somehow add in the concept that we also add elevated professional dispense fee, because sometimes people talk about benchmark pricing, but that's based on acquisition cost of drugs. And so from my perspective, those types of solutions don't work if you don't have benchmark pricing plus professional dispense fees that are in alignment with the cost to dispense. So I know most recently Montana is live with something like that in the commercial space. Colorado's got something going. There's a lot of states doing it, but for clarity purposes, I think we would not be clear if we didn't add in the objective benchmark line that would also include appropriate professional dispense fees. So that's more a clarifying comment.
No, I appreciate that. Any other discussions regarding these concepts? Dr. Hartung.
And we're going to be able to vote on all these things? Is that what we're, okay.
Not today.
Not, but, oh,
Yeah, eventually.
okay. All right.
Sarah.
I would just technical language clarification. Staff will send the board members a survey style feedback form to get your priorities, using a Likert scale, high, medium, low, to get your priority level on all of these concepts. So I wouldn't exactly call that a vote, because in the context of the PDAB work, official board votes are a specific thing, but it's a way for us to get comprehensive input from all of the board members about where are which of these many topics are the highest priorities to focus additional work on.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Shall I saw your hand was raised. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Bailey. I'm recalling feedback at the Salem Forum from a pharmacist who raised concerns about the process within DCBS for MAC appeals, which is to fill out a very lengthy form per claim, which I think is very onerous and prevents people from pursuing that option. And so I would move to add a change to the DCBS policy or process for pharmacies doing MAC appeals.
Dr. Hartung, your hand was previously raised. Did you have anything you want to add? Okay. Ms. Coder, I did want to add some color to that. I think it's interesting related to the MAC appeals. I was involved in House Bill 2123, which I think was in 2013, that helped pass that. And it took all the way till 2026, so like 13 years, to have a team to be able to even support that. So to your point, I think it was Trevor Douglas that said that it was literally just in 2026 that there's now a team. So to your point, if there is now a team, there should be a much more seamless way for stores to be able to do that. And again, that just shows you how long it took to be able to operationalize staffing and supporting that. So thank you for bringing visibility to that, because that's sometimes the disconnect between laws that are on the books and then the auditing and enforcement of laws that are on the books.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I did take note of that, and I'll look it up and apply that into the feedback form. All right, seeing no other hands, any other comments? We'll move on to patient affordability and insurance design. We have two legislative bills that were presented into Oregon law. One was regarding prior authorization. So this was enacted, and then Kobe accumulator programs, it was also enacted. Not to say that these can't go forward again for additional clarification or for more short of guardrails, if there's anything within those that interest the board to send back to legislators. The point of sale rebate pass through and the patient out-of-pocket caps was what we just submitted to the legislators. And as Chair Bailey mentioned, it looks like Senator Patterson will hopefully be able to introduce those or pull them into any of her bills. The formulary stability protections, no specialty tiers for chronic condition medications, restrictions on coinsurance cost sharing, social vulnerability index considerations, and step therapy protections were all previously discussed but not voted on. So seeing hands up, Chair Bailey.
Thank you. Mr. Murray's hand may have been raised first, but thank you. I think the only clarifying piece I recall on the formulary stability protections, Vice Chair Dr. Hartung's comments in previous meetings were very meaningful to me, related to, I guess, just making this a little more specific, no like mid-year formulary changes. If I understood his comment right from previous meetings, that would just be a little more granular on the formulary stabilizing protections piece. And that was the piece I wanted to reference.
All right, John.
A question first. So the two that were enacted, prior authorization guardrails and copay accumulator programs, are those in effect right now and being used and enforced?
I don't know about enforced or what their compliance regulations are, but if they're enacted, they are enacted bill.
Okay, all right, thank you. And then secondly, I would second the Chair Bailey's recommendation of commercial claims data coming directly to PDAB versus DFR, if we can get increased transparency and improved information concerning plan design in Oregon. If it can come to us and we can get some specificity, particularly where this is indicated as these types of things, these issues for insurance design, according to at least the Each Pick Coalition study, being one of some of the major reasons for unaffordability, more than some of the other things we might focus on. If we can get any more information on that that would provide clarity, I would welcome it.
Yeah, I can update that for you, John. Yeah, there.
Specifically to the topic of insurance plan design and what types of data and information you are looking for, that is an area where it would be really helpful to staff to have more guidance from the board, because plan designs, and we have certainly tried to collect and report out information about some of these plan design features, such as whether a drug requires prior authorization, whether a plan requires prior authorization for a specific drug, in the past. But one of the challenges that staff has encountered in that is there's a lot of different health insurance plans, and plan design can be structured in a lot of different ways. So we don't always know which data to collect or which answers you're trying to get to. So if you have specific kind of areas of interest in that space that could help us focus what we're asking to get that answer, it would be very helpful. It's as we discussed earlier, I mean, like plans do publish their formularies, for example. Some of this stuff is publicly available, but putting it into a structured format so it is useful to the board has been a challenge for us in the past, and something that would really help us to get your feedback and guidance on.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think that, for board members that feel strongly about that, they'd be able to provide any information. My recollection is also in our meeting last month, we had a pretty comprehensive discussion about that topic. And so I don't want to belabor the point here, but I think we could refer back to our meeting notes from previous month's discussions as well. But Vice Chair Dr. Hartung, you have the floor.
I mean, I guess to the point of helping focus staff on this specific issue, I feel like in our affordability reports, staff has done a pretty good job at like using the data that we do collect to get at least some sort of semblance on like utilization management tools that are used to manage these drugs. That's helpful. In terms of like policy recommendations. So for instance, this formulary stability protections, if at our, opinion gauging tool that we use comes up on top, I would say, what, surfacing evidence around formulary changes mid-year and how that negatively affects patients. States that have also implemented, maybe this is all what you do anyways, states that have also implemented laws around that particular, keeping formulary stable for the year. I think that would be helpful in terms of developing a recommendation around that particular concept. But yeah, to your point though, I don't know exactly what more in terms of data we could get around specifics of from plans about formulary design, aside from just going down a rabbit hole of drugs, time period, types of utilization management, which we're kind of already doing in the affordability process the best we can. So that's my 2 cents.
No, but I appreciate the understanding that it is challenging, but you know, it is an important part that has been identified as an impact to patients, and not just the cost of the prescription drug, right? It's also the deductible, the premium, the copay versus co-insurance, depending on the plan. That's kind of what we've consistently heard back from patients. That impacts that affordability concept. Hearing no other comments or seeing other hands raised for this section, I'm going to move on to the next slide regarding Medicaid pharmacy delivery system. Kind of already talked about CCO. I'll add that into this section. But looking again, all of these recommendations have been presented to legislators before, which is a single statewide PBM, state PBM administration, the competitive procurement model for PBM, a kind of uniformed Medicaid preferred drug list, an alignment of coverage policies across the CCOs, fee-for-service pharmacy benefit model, cost plus reimbursement model, and evaluation of Medicaid pharmacy delivery system redesign. Any comments, questions? Looking back when I was developing this, I should have probably put what year we discussed some of these instead of just throwing them all up there. So my apologies for not referencing when you had all discussed or submitted it into a report, but it has been submitted. Mr. Kennedy.
Yes, I'm wondering if you can expand the evaluation of Medicaid pharmacy delivery system redesign. I'm not sure what that statement means. I may not have been here during that conversation. I don't know, but can you expand on that at all?
I don't have any knowledge off the top of my head which one that was referring to. Again, I just went through and just pulled them out of the reports. Unless any other board members recall what the Medicaid pharmacy delivery system redesign had indicated. John?
I think it had to do with studying other states, what they've implemented and the results that they've seen, whether it's Ohio or any of the others, where they've made, for example, a single statewide PBM, and did it save money for them or not? Kind of part of our discussion with Trevor Douglas a little bit.
Yeah, I suspect it's a combined row number 2 and the final row there.
All right, anything else regarding this slide? All right, hearing none. The next one, drug manufacturer and market oversight. Again, we have a handful of recommendations and discussions. Previous recommendations include an upper payment limit and then state affordability mechanisms. Concepts that were discussed include competitive analysis, broader review of pharmaceutical market dynamics, and manufacturer pricing practices, with conversations just highlighting orphan drug review refinement, the limit orphan exemption to approved orphan indications, limit orphan exemptions to FDA exclusivity period, inflationary rebate models, and the state inflation rebate penalties using APAC data. Dr. Hartung, I see your hands up.
I guess I could go into this, but I'd be curious what we recommended related to upper payment limits in past reports. I can't remember. I know we didn't advance a recommendation to implement or grant authority, so I was just curious what people had recollection of what specifically we recommended. And then the second point is I'll make on the orphan drug thing, just because we've kind of spent a fair amount of time and bandwidth kind of thinking about orphan drugs. And I'm wondering if and I know in the orphan drug space, there are some statutory constraints in how we approach this, and the way we've the way our kind of rules lay it out, we have a process for doing so, but it's still, requires a fair amount of staff time to kind of parse out orphan versus non-orphan indications, and that's very tedious and time consuming and of unclear kind of credibility and validity. And there's questions around it. So I'm wondering if we could kind of develop some sort of informative policy memo or whatever, or concept around refining this piece, having a statutory refinement of this piece of our legislation to really focus in on a specific set of drugs that don't have exclusive orphan indications, essentially saying we are free to review drugs as long as they aren't exclusively indicated for orphan indications. Then we could kind of free ourselves up of having to do these technical distinctions that are extremely complex by staff and take a lot of time, and it's not clear if they're helpful at all in terms of just differentiating affordability from non-orphan indications versus orphan indications.
And Dr. Harteg, the whole reason I put these in here is because of the conversation that we've had over the last few months regarding orphans. So Chair Bailey, I'll come back to you in just a second. I really want to touch base on what Dan had just asked. So upper payment limits was one of our initial recommendations when the board first started up. It was not enacted, but that's where the upper payment limit report became, that's where we were required to do the upper payment limit report. Even though the report was submitted to the legislators, it was not voted on by board members as a meaningful tool for the state to use. So, but I did, again, because it was already recommended from one of our very, very, very first reports. That's why it was brought into this list, not saying that it was supported or that the board believes it's one of the best options for the state to address affordability concerns. Regarding the orphan exemption, so as you stated, there's a lot of nuances when just in the language that is used within our statute and then the clarification within our rule. Being able to kind of change the requirement would be to exempt orphan approved only, but then any drug that has an orphan designation. I think Skyrizi is a great option. You know, it has a orphan designation for children, and yet the drug itself isn't indicated to treat pediatrics. But it's due to it just has a designation versus an approval. And I think that it's really important to get it clarified how the board wants to look at orphan drugs. And as we were setting up, if you recall, I did the tiering section. So anything that's in a tier 1, there are drugs out there that treat only specific orphan conditions. But majority of the drugs that we review are often more non-orphan drug conditions than orphan conditions. So yeah, that's why it's up here, hopefully maybe just clarifying in the language what the board needs to really get at where these high cost drugs are truly creating an impact. So, but Chair Bailey, thank you for your patience. I'm gonna get back to your hand was raised.
No, thank you. No, you read my mind. The only thing I was going to say was, yeah, upper payment limits, I believe, were voted on in like 2020, which is how we ended up with Senate Bill 192. And then we did our upper payment, the upper payment report, in which we voted to not advance, the recommendation of upper payment limits. But that was the iterative process getting there.
Anything else on this slide? Okay, seeing no hands or additional comments, coming into our last slide, which is PDAB governance and authority. So as previously already submitted as a recommendation, which is to have a broader prescription drug delivery system review authority, expand affordability oversight authority, and then expand PDAB scope beyond affordability reviews, and public meeting law exemption for trade secret review protections. The discussion that was provided previously was basically the public record exemption for confidential review materials, and then new concepts that have recently come into discussion is the alternative board structure, long-term role of PDAB, and legislative review of PDAB structure and authority. And so, John, I think this is kind of where you lean quite a bit into with wanting to have some additional oversight and authority. I'm not sure if it captured everything or if there's additional information that you feel is relevant to add.
No, this is where I was hoping that I mean, we've already recommended both of the things that I had mentioned earlier in the meeting about PDAB scope beyond affordability reviews. I would really like to see this board be able to not be criticized for going outside our lane, so to speak, when we ask questions about what other states are doing to address affordability. And then the public meetings law, if it's important to get this information, then I would like it pursued. I would like to actually have our recommendations taken seriously by someone and advanced through the process to actually accomplish some good out of them.
Any other comments or questions? All right, so thinking back over the last two slides, kind of going back what Dr. Hartung was saying, is there any particular recommendation or concept that the board kind of really feels is a high importance to kind of start looking at now? Otherwise, like I said, I'm going to send out a survey form that basically has each one of these in a Likert scale from high priority to low priority, like not even worth staff time to review. Please fill those out and then get those back to me so I can set it up for next month's board meeting. You will be receiving an email from me probably tomorrow on it. But yeah, I'm going to start with John.
Thank you. I keep returning back to member coder's comment on impact and effort matrix and what good will come out of our efforts and the amount of effort it'll take to get there. And I keep going back to factual information and transparency. Anything that increases those and our ability to provide information that is more useful to the legislature and can be objective, I think is good. If it doesn't cost money, fantastic. I apologize if it increases staff time for data collection, but any of these recommendations that people think would be beneficial to increase factual information and transparency is what I would recommend initial study of.
Let's see. So are you just kind of overall transparency, or is there a specific concept within the list that you're looking at, John?
CCO data call, for example.
Okay.
There's one. 340B clearinghouse information. Is it available? Does it cost? I know it might be more the RFP or other data from other sources. That might not be a policy recommendation. That might be our work, but just those are just to start with. I'd welcome any other suggestions, or I don't want to make it too complicated, but I'm looking for information to make our work more impactful when we go to make a recommendation.
All right. I will work on that. And again, as soon as board members can fill out the survey and send it back, I'll have a better direction of what the initial insight is, and then can start developing and setting up information. Mr. Lehman, I see your hand up.
Yeah, Courtney, in the survey that is going to go out, are you going to include the ask about whether we would like the 4 sort of full assessments that you talked about, like policy memos, or the mini ones? Because I think that's important for us to talk about too, in terms of the number of like what we're expecting back from you. So is that something we should talk about now, or is that something that's going to be in the survey process, or is that something that happens next meeting?
it'd probably be better served next meeting because how the form is set up right now, it's all of these, like again, in the Likert scale. And then if I get like a whole bunch that are like high priority, then we can discuss if you want policy minis, where it's just like a super high concept, like what is the initial like bones to what the policy would represent versus like here you only see like a sentence. It'd be, you know, a handful of paragraphs of whatever I could find. Now, if there isn't a high priority and you only have, you know, a handful of ones that are really important, then we could lean into then and start the policy memos. That would be much more in depth, like the ones that were provided for the pass-through rebate and cap.
Yeah, that answers my question, Courtney. So we'll look at the results at the next meeting and then decide on which one we want.
Yes. Any other questions regarding kind of the setup of or conversation regarding these policy concepts? I'm gonna stop sharing so I can see everyone. All right, well, seeing no hands and getting no additional feedback. Again, I'll be sending you an email here probably by tomorrow. But thank you all board members and have a great rest of your month and the start of the summer.
Well, thank you very much, Courtney. And I do want to announce for the record that our next board meeting is on Wednesday, July 15th, 2026 at 8 a.m. Pacific. But with there being no further business before the board, all in favor of adjourning, please say yes.
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 And any opposed, please say no. All right, meeting is adjourned. See you next week. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.